A hot loaf of bread appeared in the boy's hands out of thin air, as if it had just come out of the oven. He took a bite, and his eyes lit up. Such bread was not even served in Japan. And she saw this marvel, the one and only skill that another world had assigned to him in his status: food cart. The boy smiled crookedly. It certainly did not resemble an invincible, all-powerful ability. And here is an ordinary office worker, Sato Ryo, breathless, dragging his burden through the dense forest of a foreign world. Neither plates, nor dishes, nor a single coin in the pocket, only an empty wooden box with a curtain. And there ahead rose the walls of a great city where no one had ever tasted what he knew how to create. Just recently, he was simply wandering the evening streets of his neighborhood in search of dinner. He daydreamed about yesterday's delicious curry when suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something unusual. Ryo was caught in front of a strange wooden cart on wheels that he had never seen here before. The boy cautiously peeked behind the curtain, but it was empty inside. He sighed and decided to continue the search for the cafeteria, but the space around him suddenly changed. Instead of the noisy night city around him, a dense, impenetrable forest instantly grew. Ryo looked around in shock, trying to understand where his entire world had gone. He recoiled in fear when a first-level status window flashed right in front of his face, like in fantasy novels. The boy was stunned by the thought that he had truly transported to another reality. Hopes for something invincible were instantly shattered. The only skill listed was the same food cart, and Ryo looked around it in confusion, finding neither a stove nor any dishes inside. There was no choice left, so he grabbed the railing and pulled this heavy burden behind him with all his might. Sweating, the boy finally made it to the hill and sighed with relief. Ahead loomed the majestic walls of a real city. Life was bustling near the gates, with carriages and crowds of people moving back and forth, which gave hope for salvation. The line moved quickly until a stern shout from the guard made him flinch. He hesitantly moved forward, hoping to pass through the checkpoint calmly. At the demand of the grim soldier, Ryo stated his name and lied that he had come from afar, as no one would understand the truth about the other world. The guard carefully compared his face with the wanted criminals list and, finding no matches, allowed him to pass. But the joy was short-lived. The guard demanded an entrance fee of 4,000 crowns. Realizing that he had no money, the boy hurriedly took off his school jacket and offered it instead. The man in armor carefully examined the quality fabric and deemed it entirely suitable for a garment. Finally, the way has opened. Pulling his cart, Ryo crossed the border of Solon, a large city in the Kingdom of Ireland. Before him stood the majestic fortress of an unknown medieval kingdom. At the market, women were cheerfully selling apples. The boy looked around in confusion, fully realizing that he had found himself in an entirely foreign world with a medieval atmosphere. Without money in his pocket, he couldn't do anything, so he decided to sell his modern clothes. Moreover, passers-by had already started to look at his strange appearance suspiciously. Soon, a loud farewell echoed from the doors of the local shop. The merchant was impressed by the excellent quality of the unusual fabric, so she paid him a substantial amount. The coins he received were enough for both new simple clothes and a cozy room in the tavern where he could finally catch his breath. Lying on the bed, the guy still couldn't believe that he had really been transported to another world. A heavy sigh of fatigue. His heart ached with longing for his parents and friends, whom he might never see again. But it was necessary to move on. The boy quickly dismissed weakness, clenched his fist resolutely, and promised himself to fight until the very end. Standing behind the counter of his summoned mobile kitchen, he decided to test this strange ability. He sharply thrust his hand forward and commanded the system to open the status window, as this skill was now his only lifeline. The boy thoughtfully examined the system screen with the magic of food creation and finally accepted that he now had to survive in this new world. He focused, stretched his hands forward, and tried to simply imagine water and wheat. In front of him, a full glass of water and golden ears of grain instantly materialized. Then he raised his palms over them for the next step. The magic immediately responded with a bright flash of light. Wheat and water truly emerged before him, so now it is time to test the magic of the craft. The boy started mixing the ingredients, sincerely hoping for success. And a loaf did appear, hot, freshly baked, so much so that saliva was dripping. The boy hurriedly took a bite. He slowly swallowed it, holding his breath in anticipation of the taste. The same thrill enveloped him again, so, feeling satisfied, the boy summoned the system window for the sake of storage magic. The cabinet doors under his palm shimmered with a soft light, giving a sense of true wonder. The boy carefully studied his status and first-level storage magic, wondering if an entire cart of bread would fit in the spatial storage. The next morning, the city woke up to the quiet singing of birds. He was turning a freshly baked loaf in his hands and anxiously wondered if he could make a living with such simple magic. He descended to the living room, where the tavern owner was already finishing setting the table. Good-natured Aunt Rosa smiled warmly and greeted the boy on the start of a new day. She placed a plate of hot scrambled eggs, sausages, and a fluffy round loaf in front of him. The boy's approving gesture made the woman laugh joyfully. He savored the juicy sausage, almost swallowing his tongue from pleasure. The boy took a bite of the fluffy bread, trying to understand if all the local pastries had such an unusual taste. He saw such bread for the first time, as nothing like it was sold in his homeland of Japan. When the plate was empty, he shared his plans to start his own business and asked the woman for advice on the first steps. Aunt Rosa gave him an assessing look and inquired about which craft he had chosen. The woman confidently advised him to start with the Merchants Guild, and the boy, warmly thanking her for the tip, hurried there. On the way, he remembered the neighboring bakery and decided to stop by to personally assess the competitors and their goods. Rio looked around the shelves and noticed that everything was piled up with round loaves of bread, just the kind of bread he had eaten in the morning. A sudden idea flashed in the boy's mind. If toast bread becomes popular here, it will bring in a lot of money, especially since nothing resembling toast was sold in this world at all. Without thinking for long, he set off straight to the Merchants Guild. Behind the counter, a nice employee in glasses named Natasha greeted the guy and warmly asked about the purpose of his visit. Hearing about the plans to trade from a cart, she explained that it would be registered at the lowest rank of a fifth-class merchant, and the duty and annual fee would amount to as much as 80,000 crowns. Rio confidently confirmed his desire to sell baked goods on the street, so the girl took on the design. She showed the new card and sternly instructed not to lose it, as it is an official identification. Although the amount turned out to be substantial, the boy unhesitatingly placed a heavy pouch of coins on the table. Now there was only a formality left. Natasha asked him to place his palm on the stone slab. The ancient artifact brightly illuminated as it read the personal data of the new guild member. In an instant, the flash faded, and the satisfied girl handed the boy his brand new token and merchant card. Wishing him success as a farewell, she watched the future magnate finally step out into the sunny city square. The official registration has finally been completed. Now his business has officially been given the green light. At first, the guy was very worried about his plan, but now he breathed a sigh of relief as he could finally start his own business. Looking at the noisy market ahead, he clenched his fist resolutely. This was where his real battle was set to begin tomorrow. The usual buzz filled the streets, and passers-by whispered indifferently to each other. In the middle of this crowd, a boy named Rio was calling out to customers, inviting them to taste freshly baked bread. He entered this world along with a strange cart and a unique ability to bake bread using magic. Rio believed that a successful sale would be his ticket to a new life, so he mentally prepared for the decisive battle for the buyer. His fluffy loaves were gilded and shimmering in the sun. However, the market lived its own life, and people simply walked past the new stall. Passers-by looked on with obvious suspicion, making the guy nervous, when suddenly someone from the crowd called out to him. Rio quickly assessed the situation and hopefully offered the guests a free tasting. It was an acquaintance, Mrs. Rosa, who came over to greet, along with her nephew Kane, a professional chef. Both took a slice and started chewing. Rosa lowered her gaze to the unfinished piece, listening to her feelings. In the next moment, her eyes widened in shock, and Cain exclaimed in astonishment, frozen in place. The woman shouted at the top of her lungs that this pastry is completely different from any ordinary bread. The pulp broke apart in their hands into delicate fibers, releasing a hot aroma and such an airy texture that they had never tasted before. The buyer joyfully declared that she would serve this bread for dinner, despite the doubts of her companion Cain. The woman firmly demanded to buy up all the supplies, as such bread is usually eaten only by the nobility. For getting whole baskets of fresh pastries, she happily thanked Rio. The young man sighed with relief, rejoicing in his first success. But just as he was getting ready to bake a new batch, a growing roar sounded from outside. New customers visited the store after hearing about the bread from Mrs. Rose. A huge crowd was gathering behind them. The noise intensified. People instantly surrounded the counter, clamoring to buy the amazing new product. Rio had to hurriedly announce a short break to calm the customers down. He gratefully shouted after them. Suddenly, a soft jingle sounded in the air. The exhausted boy could only marvel at the power of women's recommendations. His level instantly soared to 4, and now he could make croissants. The first attempt was successful. A golden croissant appeared on the table, glowing with warmth. He gazed spellbound at his own palms and decided to create another one immediately. The boy took a bite and closed his eyes in pleasure. The pastry had a perfect crispy crust and a delicate, creamy taste. He smiled contentedly, anticipating how quickly he would sell everything by lunchtime and make a lot of money. However, in a moment he was engulfed by doubts. Simply baking bread did not raise his level, so did this constant chase for gold make any sense? Soon the boy was already standing behind the counter of his stall and cheerfully chatting with the first customer. The customers instantly rushed to the counter. The girls held hot croissants in their hands, examining them with unrestrained delight. The first silver coins for the completed order flew into his outstretched palm. Money was pouring onto the table, while fresh loaves disappeared one by one. The boy stared in shock at the crowd of women who kept approaching. He had to announce in a guilty voice that everything was sold out for today. The client sighed in disappointment and promised to come back tomorrow, making him exhale wearily. The boy closed the empty stall and finally got ready to count today's earnings. Rio did not expect everything to get so complicated on the very first day, and his skill in driving the cart would turn out to be a real treasure. However, the prospect of working alone at such a pace every day frightened him. Although today's revenue pleasantly delighted the eye with a pile of shiny coins, the boy decided to seek refuge in the Merchants' Guild. He needed an assistant immediately. The registrar in glasses listened carefully to his request for hire. She warmly greeted Rio, curiously waiting to see what he needed. The girl offered to post an advertisement on the local board for a small fee. Both temporary workers and permanent employees were looking for jobs on it. The advertisement was supposed to work quickly. Birds circled with cries over the majestic roof of the guild. Rio awkwardly rubbed the back of his head and asked for a day to think it over. An assistant is an assistant, but first it was necessary to prepare the stall for tomorrow, although someone was already rummaging around the goods. Behind the boxes sat a gaunt, tearful girl in a tattered hood, whose stomach growled loudly down the street. The boy stopped by his cart and noticed a little girl in a hood who had squeezed between the boxes and was quietly sobbing, so he gently asked if she was okay. A quiet, surprised sigh was heard near the cozy street stall. A nice girl, with tears in her eyes, joyfully exclaimed that her name was Sarah and began to fervently thank her rescuer. The boy smiled awkwardly and asked why she found herself in such a dangerous place. Instead of answering, Sarah cried tears of joy and devoured the delicious bread, while the shopkeeper offered her to calm down and rest. Having slightly quelled her hunger, she shyly touched her cheek and began her story. It turned out that the girl came from a remote, secluded village called Triat. She held a half-eaten piece of bread in her hands, and the boy sympathetically noted that she didn't even have any belongings. Sarah sniffled and recounted how she had dreamed of getting to the big city of Solon, but on the way, bandits and swindlers took absolutely everything from her. Night had fallen. It was too late to look for a job, and the poor girl cried out of despair as she had nowhere to spend the night. The master silently marveled at her terrible situation, while she lamented about tomorrow's job search in the guild. Then the boy decided to introduce himself and said that his name was Rio. He founded a trading company and sells bread at this stall. Hearing this, Sarah suddenly declared decisively that she had an extremely immodest request for him. She looked into his eyes, ready to help in any way. The girl bowed deeply and pleaded for permission to work in his stall to repay his kindness. The girl couldn't believe her own ears, and with hope in her eyes, asked again if it was true. The boy awkwardly explained that he actually needed assistance, so he would gladly hire her. Hearing this, she cried tears of joy, promised to do her best, and named herself Sarah. The young man decided to rent a room for the new assistant for the night, so she would have a place to stay. As a farewell, he smiled warmly and wished Sarah a good rest until tomorrow. The next morning, the city square was already bustling with its usual life. The workday began at the stall, where the owners started showing Sarah their booth. He started naming the prices for toasts and croissants, but the girl suddenly was surprised that such delicious bread was considered yesterday's. Then the young man calmly explained that he could create fresh pastries at any moment using magic. Sarah nervously began to apologize for eating so much of the product, but the guy just smiled and reassured her. Right in front of her, he stretched out his hands and in a moment conjured a hot croissant. Sarah was stunned in shock, staring at the fresh pastries with her mouth open. She seriously asked if he had never heard of the law of impossibility of creating food magically. The girl indignantly argued that it was beyond possible, while the baker just blinked in confusion. The girl held a fresh bun in her hands and passionately argued that no magic in the world can create food from nothing. Her eyes nearly popped out of her head when the guy calmly replied that he really could do it. He raised 2 fingers and added that it seemed he had control over a few more types of magic. Looking at the wooden cart, the girl asked the name of the strange skill and heard an unfamiliar word in response. Food cart. In front of the young man appeared a screen with a list of ingredients where culinary magic had recently appeared alongside water and wheat. While the companion was recovering from her surprise, he cheerfully suggested testing the new power and making some meat. A bright flash of light. A juicy piece of fresh pork appeared on the counter, causing the girl to stutter in shock. She whispered in astonishment that she had never seen such quality. This meat was on par with the delicacy of orc pork. The boy excitedly exclaimed that it was now time to test his culinary magic. He wondered about himself, as ordinary pork was somehow considered a luxury in this strange world. The magical aura shone again. A hot, juicy hamburger patty appeared on the plate, steaming appetizingly. The young man with a smile suggested taking a sample, while the girl only fearfully asked if she could really eat it. The girl looked at the hot dish in surprise, which sparkled so appetizingly on the plate in front of her. She hesitantly sent the first piece to her mouth, but in a moment she closed her eyes in pure delight. The girl exclaimed excitedly that even the Lord had never tasted such a delicacy, and Rio simply smiled in relief and joy in response. Confident in her success, she assured that this steak would definitely be snatched up by buyers, but the young man promised to sell it with a little clever twist. With pride and confidence in his eyes, he announced his plan to make a real hamburger based on a beefsteak. The wind swept over the rooftops of the town where a gastronomic revolution was about to take place. All the basic utensils quickly appeared on the table: a frying pan, a sharp knife, and deep bowls for work. Both resolutely set to work and began preparing by putting on kitchen aprons. Rio calmly surveyed the room, preparing for the cooking process. Soon the boy was already holding a large paper bag filled to the top with fresh ingredients. He smiled and asked his companion for help, and she immediately volunteered with a joyful exclamation. On the clean countertop, everything necessary was laid out: fresh lettuce leaves, juicy tomatoes, fluffy buns, and fragrant ketchup. The whole secret was to neatly place hot meat and slices of tomato on the bun. The sharp knife obediently sliced the ripe tomato into evenly juicy rounds. The young cook proudly showcased her first finished masterpiece, a juicy hamburger with a fluffy bun. The boy hurriedly swallowed a piece and enthusiastically nodded, while his girlfriend was already anticipating a real sensation in the market. While the friends jokingly argued to ensure no one took food without permission, a mysterious stranger watched them closely from the shadows. An elderly gentleman peeked out from behind the brick wall, his gaze sparkling with curiosity. Determined, the young chefs loudly announced the start of large-scale preparations. Upon returning to the castle, the mustached observer immediately headed to his master's office. The majestic fortress loomed on the hill, hiding influential aristocrats behind its walls. Behind closed doors, the lord inquired about the strange stall, while the servant described in detail the previously unseen dish of pork and bread. Lord Cheridos smiled with interest and ordered Modon to bring this mysterious cook for a personal audience next time. Meanwhile, the girl continued to chew with appetite, completely unaware of the clouds gathering above her head. A crowd quickly gathered around the small street cart, and people began to eagerly buy the new amazing dish. The girl took her first bite and just froze in surprise. She chewed slowly, trying to savor each ingredient. The customers were amazed as they examined the cut of the bun, not understanding where all the juiciness in the meat came from and how the sauce had such a rich tomato flavor. "Is there really something so delicious in this world?" she exclaimed in astonishment, and immediately asked for a second helping. Hearing this, the crowd erupted with curiosity, and the shoppers began to sweep away all the goods in bundles. The last customer in the hood just sighed in disappointment and promised to come back tomorrow. A sign with a crossed-out burger appeared on the counter. Everything was sold out to the last crumb. Suddenly, the young man felt someone's intense gaze on him and turned around. From behind, there was a restrained cough and a polite greeting. The young man turned around and was astonished by how noble and majestic the stranger looked. A distinguished gentleman with a mustache and a hat inquired whether they really served the same burgers here. Hearing the confirmation, the guest calmly nodded, and the young man with a smile invited him to visit again another time. He awkwardly scratched the back of his head and added that, unfortunately, they had already closed for the day. The girl looked at the notes in confusion and realized that she had to report everything to her master immediately. But suddenly, she flinched in surprise. An elderly man in a hat appeared before her, politely apologizing for his unexpected arrival. The girl tried to smooth over the awkwardness and, with a strange smile, inquired about the purpose of his visit. The stranger introduced himself as Modon, the chief steward of Lord Cerrito, and immediately stunned them with the news. The master wants to taste a hamburger and invites them to the castle, which nearly caused the girl to lose her composure, and she pulled Rio aside. After that, the butler calmly said goodbye, promising to return the next day. She cheerfully assured the guest that everything was fine, although the exhausted Rio next to her was literally about to collapse. But as soon as Modon disappeared from sight, the girl herself exhaled with relief, admitting how nervous she had been. Rio sincerely did not understand what he had done wrong, but his partner immediately scolded him for his rude behavior. She pointed to the majestic castle in the distance and explained that Lord Cerrito is the ruler of this entire region. The boy gaped in astonishment at such scale, while his companion added that angering this man meant the end of their peaceful life in the city. Frightened Rio began to ask for details, and the girl had to reveal her cards. She admitted that the mighty Lord Cerrito is like a second dad to her father. The thing is, her father holds the title of Baron and governs the local village under the direct patronage of this ruler. The boy asked in shock if Sarah was a noblewoman, to which she awkwardly waved her hands and asked not to call her lady, as it was just a modest title. He quickly figured out that in that case, the girl was the daughter of the lord of the village himself. Sarah began to detail the hierarchy of the Kingdom of Ireland, where minor nobles received land from the king and submitted to the more powerful feudal lords of the region. In response to his question about whether it suited her to work in such a simple place, the girl indignantly objected, as Rio was her savior. She mysteriously added that this is not all, leaving the guy only to blink in surprise. Suddenly embarrassed, the girl blushed deeply, covered her face with her hands, and hurriedly changed the subject to the upcoming visit to Lord Cerrito. Having calmed down a bit, she cleared her throat and called for the immediate preparation for the trip to the castle. The girl proudly stated that she was taught impeccable etiquette and social manners at home, so everything would go perfectly. First of all, she decided to buy her partner decent clothes, to which he could only sigh resignedly. Rio gladly entrusted her with all the preparations, and Sarah confidently smiled in response. Soon they were walking around the city together, looking at shop signs and kitchen utensils. The girl smiled conspiratorially as they finally stepped over the threshold of the clothing store. The fitting room curtains suddenly jerked to the side. Sarah enthusiastically urged to buy the best chef's outfit available, while the guy scratched his head in confusion at such a choice. The last stop on their shopping list was Orphan's Workwear Workshop. Although the price was steep, there was simply no other choice in Rio. The host showed one outfit for 70,000 crowns and then suggested looking at another attire as well. The guy confidently ordered 2 sets of uniforms at once, which greatly shocked his companion. Sarah confusedly denied that buying such expensive things was wasteful. She tried to refuse in favor of cheaper options, but Rio gently insisted on his own as she was working alongside him. Sarah emotionally promised to take care of this clothing, while the boy just smiled and asked her instead to support him at Lord Cerrito's castle. The meeting finally concluded, and starting the next day, the heroes faced exhausting lessons in etiquette and good manners. On the way back, Rio jokingly remarked that the whole outing felt very much like a real date. Sarah sincerely admitted that she really enjoyed the joint shopping, and the guy himself was also pleased with their little trip. However, in a moment, the girl realized the subtext of his words and blushed deeply from embarrassment. She angrily demanded to stop babbling nonsense and quickened her pace while the surprised Rio tried to catch up with her, not even noticing the notification about acquiring a new skill. Rio, along with his companion, stopped in front of the huge stairs leading to the luxurious royal castle. The girl was noticeably nervous before the important meeting, but the young man quickly calmed her down and reminded her of the thorough preparation. The gray-haired butler greeted the guests and offered to take them to Lord Cerrito's office. The servant knocked on the door, announcing the arrival of the cooks, and an invitation to enter immediately sounded from inside. The steward opened the door, allowing the guests to enter. They carefully entered inside, quietly apologizing for the concern. Meeting them was Lord Cerrito himself, a refined young aristocrat who greeted them with a friendly smile and apologized for such a sudden summons. The head of the office requested to skip unnecessary formalities, so the young man introduced himself as Rio, the head of the Sato Trading Company. The boy sincerely thanked, mentally sighing with relief at such kindness from the nobleman. Cerrito said that Rio's hamburgers became the main topic of conversation in the city, and the castle servants praised them so much that he simply had to try one. He admitted that, due to strong excitement, he didn't eat anything today, so he urged to immediately get down to business. Rio smiled confidently, recalling the recently learned magic. He energetically agreed and promised to prepare everything. With a single gesture of his hand, the boy uttered a spell and summoned a real Japanese food cart in the middle of the office. Thanks to the increased level, he gained access to creating new ingredients and realized that he would now be able to prepare what he had in mind. The boy entrusted the preparation to Sarah, who readily agreed to help. He activated the magic of multiplying the little cart. With one exclamation, he transformed the kitchen into a modern workspace. The necessary products appeared on the table, extracted using storage magic. The knives quickly clattered on the board. It's time for the side dish. Soon, the signature teriyaki sauce was bubbling appetizingly in the pan. He quickly fried the potato slices in oil and generously sprinkled them with salt. All that was left was to place the juicy cutlet on the bun and generously drizzle it with sauce. An appetizing signature burger set with golden French fries appeared before the guest. Lord Cerrito looked at the dish of unprecedented shape with surprise. He smiled and reached out his hands for the bun. Suddenly, the servant brought him a knife and fork. The boy looked surprised at the unusual round dish in his hands. Deciding to eat it with his hands, as the chef did, he confidently took the first bite. Suddenly, his face darkened, and the cooks held their breath in fear of hearing the terrible verdict. But in a moment, he beamed with delight, exclaiming that he had never tasted such a delicacy in his life. The guest devoured the burger with both cheeks, wondering how such a masterpiece could be created from simple beans. After milking, he curiously brought a golden potato slice to his face. The boy asked about the strange, rich sauce, and the chef explained that it was just regular soy sauce made from beans. He put a piece of potato in his mouth and instantly froze. It was crispy on the outside and incredibly tender on the inside, making one marvel at the simplicity of its preparation. Hearing that the potatoes were simply fried in oil and salted, the boy nodded in amazement, separately praising the impeccable tomato sauce. When the plate was empty, the chef offered a second helping, to which the satisfied guest happily agreed. Seeing the sincere smiles of the cooks, the boy warmly smiled back at them. However, in just a moment, the boy leaned back comfortably in his chair, wondering how he had unknowingly cleared his entire plate. Lord Cerrito sat with a sly smile, pondering aloud that the local ingredients seemed simple, but their quality was unattainable for ordinary people, and the cooking methods he was seeing for the first time. The young cook could only blink in confusion, and cold sweat appeared on his temple. Cerrito leaned in a little closer, piercingly looking straight into the eyes, and demanded to know where these amazing recipes and products came from. Fortunately, the guy was saved by his partner, who bravely stepped forward and politely explained that this was a major commercial secret of their trading company. The aristocrat readily agreed with his argument, acknowledging that revealing the secret would destroy all the value of their cause, and calmly changed the subject. Then he settled more comfortably in his chair and announced that after such a hearty dinner, he wanted to give them a gift in return. "What exactly do you want?" the Lord asked slyly, leaving the boy completely bewildered by such a sudden opportunity. Lord Cerrito decided to generously reward the chef for the wonderful dinner. He directly asked the young man which gift he would like to receive. The boy was just stammering in confusion from the surprise. After recovering a bit, he admitted that he dreams of leaving the street cart and opening his own restaurant. "Therefore, I asked for permission to answer this question later, when the time comes." The young man sincerely added that he still does not know what exactly he will need for this. Cerrito thoughtfully squinted, clasping his fingers in a lock. He silently studied his guest's gaze. Finally, the aristocrat smiled and ordered the steward to bring the seal. He decided to trust his intuition, which confidently pointed to the boy's honesty. Hearing this, Modon turned pale with shock and asked if the master really wanted to give away such a valuable thing. However, he did not dare to argue and obediently went to carry out the order. Soon, the butler handed the box to the cook, asking him to take care of it. Before that, he quietly opened the door, carefully carrying this treasure on the silk fabric. In the luxurious box, there was a mysterious white seal, the true meaning of which the foreigners could not even guess. Rio joyfully called Sarah, suggesting it was finally time to go back. The noble guest advised to inquire about the gift at the Merchant Guild, and Rio gratefully promised to keep the mysterious thing safe. Suddenly, Sarah fearfully pointed her finger at the seal in her friend's hands and shouted that this artifact was deadly dangerous. The Lord raised his eyebrows in surprise and asked if she was the daughter of Baron Estrand. Rio stared blankly at the seal, unable to believe his own luck. The girl joyfully confirmed her status as the second daughter of the noble house, and the Lord warmly recalled her visit to the ceremony of his investiture. He added that he owes a lot to her father, so they can confidently count on his support. The man smiled warmly, thoughtfully repeating the new name of their company, Sato. As a farewell, Rio warmly invited him to come again for burgers and fries, to which he gladly agreed. The magnificent stone castle remained behind, towering over the mountain ridge. The crew drove through the cobbled streets of the city, taking the heroes home. Tired friends collapsed helplessly in the passenger seats, barely catching their breath from exhaustion. After resting a bit, the boy opened the box again, deciding to carefully examine the mysterious gift. Lord Cerrito turned out to be a very kind person, and also appreciated their signature burgers highly. The boy opened the gifted box, but inside lay an ordinary-looking seal. When he showed it to the girl during the carriage ride, she changed in face from surprise. She seriously explained that this is the personal heraldic emblem of the powerful noble family of Fostria. Any merchant in the city could only dream of such a thing. Any document with this seal had immense power, and the Fostria family took full responsibility for it. However, she immediately warned sternly that it is not allowed to use it as one pleases. The boy asked if the Lord would come to help in case of trouble, and the girl confirmed it with a smile. Then he realized that the mere presence of this seal provided them with powerful protection. But the girl suddenly added that a mistake or a signed foolish contract would undermine the reputation of the nobles, and then his own life would be in danger. Upon hearing this, the young man instantly broke into a sweat from fear, but his friend just laughed cheerfully. Since it was already given, they had to take it. The lid of the box closed with a loud click. The boy firmly decided to accept this dangerous gift. Now the heroes, with new powers, set off to the Merchants Guild to finally open their long-dreamed-of shop. The tense workdays finally came to an end, so the tired Rio decided to treat himself to a well-deserved day off. Meanwhile, Lord Cerrito stood by the window, smiling mysteriously. His assistant Modon doubted whether it was right to give the royal seal to an ordinary boy, but the Lord confidently disagreed. Cerrito explained that he had never seen similar dishes before, which indicated the young man's connection to completely unknown lands. He believed that the success of this strange chef would bring unprecedented prosperity to the city. Then the Lord looked seriously at his assistant and recalled his special skill, intuition. Modon himself knew very well how powerful this gift of his master was. She has guided Cerrito all her life and has saved him from danger countless times. Suddenly, all the Lord's grandeur vanished, and he confessed that the fries with ketchup were incredibly delicious. He even started to tremble at the thought that without the new Rio establishment, he would no longer be able to taste it. "I want her again!" Cerrito shouted wildly across the entire office, clenching his fists. He was almost crying from the desire to taste it again, while Modon wearily begged the master to stop these childish food tantrums. The story continued in the city of Solon, near the majestic building of the local Merchants Guild. The gaze lingered on the window of the guild's office. Rio suddenly turned around at the familiar voice. Sarah ran up to him, holding thick accounting books in her hands. The girl cheerfully greeted and apologized for being late, while Rio only asked with concern if she had managed to rest. They set off together to the meeting, dreaming of the soon opening of their own shop. At the registration desk, they were greeted by a guild employee named Natasha, who had already heard rumors about their strange hamburgers. Natasha's glasses gleamed as she expressed surprise at the recent visit to Lord Cerrito's estate. She opened the door to the free meeting room. Natasha invited the guests to come inside for a discussion of the report. After closing the door behind them, she informed that the office was securely protected by silence magic from prying ears. Sarah obediently handed her the thick report, asking her to handle the papers carefully. Natasha focusedly began to flip through the pages. Suddenly, her eyes widened in surprise. There was no record of ingredient purchases in the report. Natasha squinted suspiciously as she looked at the unusually low expenses in the documents and directly asked if there was some kind of trick involved. Having placed an open ledger in front of her, she urged Sarah to finally clarify the situation. She sternly added that honest business cannot be conducted with such meager expenses, so they may face an inspection. Sarah was outraged and assured that thanks to her skill in precise calculation, she had checked each digit dozens of times. Rio silently became anxious. He understood Natasha's suspicions, as thanks to his skill, food cart, they really didn't have to buy almost anything. Noticing his hesitation, Natasha gently smiled and assured the boy that he had nothing to fear. Sarah panicked and grabbed her head, while Rio was so surprised that he almost lost his ability to speak. Natasha hurried to reassure her friends, promising that no information about Rio's business would fall into the hands of aristocrats or the royal family. The Guild of Merchants operates independently of the state and fiercely protects the secrets of its members. The boy sighed with relief and decided to finally reveal his main secret to her. Natasha nearly lost her ability to speak upon hearing about the legendary ability to create goods from nothing. This explained everything. But although Natasha guaranteed confidentiality to outsiders, she still had to report it to the head of the guild. She closed the magazine and greeted the boy with a smile on his promotion to fourth-rank merchant. Finally, Natasha announced the final amount of their net profit, over 4 million crowns, from which they will now have to pay taxes. The guild worker handed the boy an elegant box with a sparkling fourth-rank merchant's emblem and wished him success in his future work. After that, she calmly sat down in her place. Adjusting her glasses, she gently suggested explaining everything in more detail. The boy awkwardly asked what this status actually meant, which seriously shocked the girl. She laid out the entire merchant hierarchy, from wandering traders to all-powerful magnates, and the boy quickly realized that a higher rank guarantees more trust and substantial profits. The boy sincerely promised to try hard and asked for advice on one important matter. The interlocutor immediately tensed up and noted that having her own shop requires huge preparation and significant finances. He confirmed that he indeed plans to open his store and asked what exactly is needed for that. The guild worker began to count on her fingers the expenses for rent, staff salaries, equipment, and the reserve fund, causing both guests to simply hold their heads in disbelief. She added that the guild can provide a loan, but for a newcomer company, the limit is only 1 million crowns, which made her companions sigh in disappointment. Seeing their confusion, the guild worker decided to offer another solution. Suddenly, the young man pondered, recalling one thing that could help with the funding. He took out an elegant box, inside of which lay a personal seal once received from Lord Cerrito. Seeing the object, the girl stared at it in shock, mumbling about the legendary S-rank seal. The girl stared at the paper in surprise, instantly recognizing the personal seal of Lord Cerrito from the Festria family. She jumped in place from sheer shock. Natasha fell back with a crash along with the chair, and a frightened Sarah rushed to check if she was hurt. The boy hurriedly nodded, agreeing to return the dangerous thing, as keeping it with him was too frightening. She adjusted her glasses and urged Rio to listen very carefully. Sighing, Natasha explained that he had now become the owner of a unique relic that young companies are never trusted with. With this sign, the guild provided loans without any collateral and no upper limit, which left Sarah gaping in astonishment. Rio thoughtfully rubbed his chin, recalling that Sarah had recently told him exactly the same thing. However, she warned that if the deal with this seal tarnishes the name of the Festria house, the partners will lose their merchant status, and no one will vouch for their lives anymore. Natasha warned that the rapid rise of their company would inevitably provoke envy and hostility from the old merchants. However, this seal served as a reliable shield. No one in their right mind would dare to touch the allies of House Festria. Hearing this, Sarah laughed with relief, joking about what an amazing boss she had to work with. The girl smiled gently and added that despite all the risks, obtaining such a status is the dream of any merchant. She warmly clasped her hands and wished her partner success, promising guild support in all future endeavors. He smiled sincerely and assured that they were also looking forward to the start of their joint work. In the cozy tavern, the evening began with pleasant chatter. Our hero and his companion Sarah joyfully clinked their wooden mugs, celebrating a successful promotion. The girl praised the beer so enthusiastically that she didn't even notice the funny foam on her lips. Suddenly, a waitress approached their table with trays in her hands. She smiled and apologized for the wait while setting the plates. A gigantic piece of juicy meat appeared before the friends, causing both of them to widen their eyes in surprise. Sarah devoured the treats with gusto, wondering how she could have eaten so much. The boy looked at her warmly and involuntarily recalled their first meeting when the frightened girl huddled under the blanket. He couldn't believe that a whole month had already passed since that day. Sarah was happy about her new job, while the hero recalled how suddenly fate had thrown him into another world. In the midst of a foreign kingdom, alone by his trading cart, he survived only by a miracle. The boy looked at his friend, realizing that he definitely wouldn't have managed this month without her. Suddenly, he remembered the main thing and decided that it was time for a surprise. With a sincere smile, he handed Sarah a heavy bag of coins, her well-deserved prize. Rio handed her an additional pouch, but the girl surprisedly objected, as she had already received her payment earlier. She peeked inside, There was a pile of gold coins shining brightly. The girl pointed to the chef's uniform and honestly admitted that she would definitely fail herself. They stood side by side, reminiscing about their shared journey and the first timid steps. The boy smiled warmly and assured her that she fully deserved this reward for her perseverance. They had dinner together in a friendly manner, joked, and the girl kindly asked him not to overexert himself. New beer mugs appeared on the table, and Rio dared to ask about personal matters. She pressed the pouch tightly to her chest and with tears of gratitude promised to work even harder. Rio asked curiously why she had acquired the skill of calculation at all. The girl recounted how she had been engrossed in books since childhood and loved learning above all else. It was precisely for this reason that she came to Solon, where Rio picked her up. Suddenly, the girl looked at him seriously and asked about his own dream. Rio pondered thoughtfully while gripping the mug, trying to understand what he wanted to achieve in this new world. In his memory, the image of a modern diner with a bright sign surfaced, prompting him to search again for the root cause of his desire. He came here completely unplanned. But above all, he wanted to do work that would make everyone smile. Earlier, he was just trying to survive, but now he has finally made up his mind. Sarah looked at him in surprise. He wanted to travel, open branches in different cities, and make the Sato company truly great. The girl smiled warmly. He clasped his fingers intently. The boy openly suggested that she work together. Sarah even held her breath when she heard that he needed her strength specifically. The very next moment, she cheerfully gave a thumbs up, promising to make the company invincible. They sealed the agreement with a firm handshake. The partners decided to open a shop right here in Salona as the first step. But everything went completely wrong. The door swung open with a bang, and a frightened assistant rushed into the room screaming. He suddenly fell to his knees and pressed his forehead to the ground, begging to be taken as a disciple, which left the boy and the girl only exchanging bewildered glances. The boy unexpectedly fell to his knees in front of Rio and shouted loudly down the street, begging to be taken as a student. Both were simply stunned with amazement. Rio recognized in him Cain, the cook from Lady Rosa's tavern, and he firmly grabbed him by the arms and demanded to work together. When asked about the reason for such haste, Cain confidently denied that he had been thinking about it for a long time. Trying to calm the noisy guest, Rio was surprised to learn that he was Mrs. Rose's nephew. But he had a job at the tavern. Cain proudly exclaimed that he was free, which completely shocked Rio. Then he handed over the sealed letter. In the letter, Rosa thanked for the delicious bread and wrote that her nephew is literally obsessed with the joint venture. She asked to take care of the boy. Aunt assured that despite some inattentiveness, Cain has a true culinary talent. In response to the girl's question about such a choice, the chef passionately confessed that he was deeply captivated by the master's signature hamburger. Cain enthusiastically added that he wants to master other techniques as he had not known either how to fry meat in such a way or that it could be placed inside bread. Rio thought about it, as they really lacked assistance for the future opening of their own shop. He stood opposite the chef, trying to calm his nerves before an important conversation. Suddenly, the boy bent deeply in a bow and passionately shouted, begging to be taken as a student. The master was surprised by such persistence, but calmly replied that he first needed to check his culinary skills. Cain raised his head with hope upon hearing warm words of understanding in response. The boss wanted to see the talent that Lady Rose had mentioned with his own eyes, so the boy resolutely rolled up his sleeves. The trial decided to begin without any delays near the wooden cart with food. The chef laid out selected vegetables and juicy meat on the table, instructing to make a regular hamburger from them. Cain confidently took the knife. He simply cheerfully confirmed that this simple inventory would be more than enough for him. The boy's hand turned into a blurred shadow, and the blade swiftly began to chop the ingredients. Perfectly even slices of tomatoes and rings of onion flew up. The spectators around could only gape in shock at such insane speed. The vegetables obediently fell one by one onto the fried cutlet, covered with a layer of dark sauce. In a moment, Cain presented the finished, extraordinarily appetizing masterpiece with a proud smile. Even the remnants of ingredients on the board were cut perfectly straight and neatly. Sarah gazed at the dish in amazement, marveling not only at the boy's incredible speed, but also at the impeccable quality of his work. The filling lay hair to hair, and the ketchup was distributed so evenly that there was simply nothing to complain about. Rio also couldn't hide his surprise, and directly asked how it was possible to cook so quickly, to which the chef simply smiled modestly. Kane revealed his secret by showing a status with an active cooking skill that significantly increased cooking speed. The boy awkwardly scratched the back of his head, justifying himself with a low skill level, although for Rio such a result already seemed beyond the possible. Then Rio took a confident step forward and extended his hand to the boy. He admitted that Kane, with his jewel-like precision, even surpassed him, although Rio had long been accustomed to this work. From this day, Kane officially became a member of the Sato Company, and Rio happily welcomed the new colleague to the team. The young cook couldn't hold back tears of joy and immediately called Rio his master and Sarah his older sister. Rio just laughed at such emotions and hurried to assure that he is not a teacher at all, although he is sincerely glad to work with him. Life on the city streets continued to bustle at its usual pace. Sarah was happy, as the professional chef had become a true salvation for them, and their company had taken another important step forward. Suddenly, the girl turned to Rio and curiously asked why they needed an assistant if his own magic was already quite sufficient. The boy admitted that his culinary magic of making burgers has one serious drawback. Nearby, an empty wooden cart on wheels was waiting. The girl anxiously asked which specific downside he was talking about. A shining, magical circle spun under his hands, activating the culinary power right next to the wooden cart. A bright light flashed, and the boy pulled out a pile of fresh meat and vegetables, leaving his friends gaping in astonishment. The assistant shouted in shock, not understanding how the food could appear by itself from the mobile kitchen, but the young man just smiled awkwardly in response. However, he quickly became serious and urged his companions to look further, as the girl had already suspected some flaw in such a convenient skill. The boy laid out a whole mountain of products on the light circle: juicy meat, eggs, and vegetables. On a large plate, a single tiny cutlet appeared with a sizzle. The boy nodded gloomily, confirming her guess. The girl leaned over the table, not believing her eyes. Could so many ingredients have gone into one ordinary burger? He explained that during magical cooking, a huge amount of resources was wasted, and the volume of the finished dish was significantly reduced. From this perspective, this skill was extremely ineffective, and they could not ignore such losses in the future. Then the assistant suggested the simplest solution: to sell the ingredients raw to avoid any losses. Suddenly, he raised his hand high and loudly exclaimed that he had one more question for the master. The companions only glanced at him suspiciously, tense and waiting for the next nonsense. Sarah cautiously objected that such a sale would undermine both the farmers and the other traders, while a puzzled Kane could not understand why. Kane confidently nodded that of course he would buy his teacher's cheap and quality vegetables. However, the companion decided to bring him down to earth by asking whose goods he would choose if Rio's vegetables cost less than the market price. After all, Rio knows how to create products from nothing, so the emergence of such a cheap product will ruin the business of other merchants and completely collapse the market. Kane finally realized why these ingredients cannot be sold in their pure form. The girl insisted. If Rio took the matter seriously, all the farmers in the kingdom would instantly be out of work. The young man agreed with this extreme example, as he did not want to harm others with his superpowers at all. Kane was genuinely impressed by the master's nobility, and the master explained that this was precisely why he wanted to learn to make burgers entirely by hand. Kane asked in confusion if all of this was really entrusted to him. Rio smiled and suggested that the student take over the entire kitchen. The boy beamed with happiness and confidently gave a thumbs up, promising to do everything in the best way possible. Soon, a crowd of curious townspeople began to gather near their closed stall. 2 weeks have passed. Juicy hot patty, fresh tomatoes, onions, and crispy lettuce soared in a dynamic dance. In an instant, 3 appetizing burgers appeared, shining in the sun. Kane finally put juicy burgers on the table, and the hungry Rio eagerly dug into the feast. The boy praised his friend for the crazy pace, to which the cook simply smiled contentedly and continued skillfully chopping the greens. Suddenly, a light rustle was heard behind them, causing Ryo to turn around in surprise. The young man never ceased to be amazed at how skillfully Kane managed to chatter non-stop right during cooking. Here comes Mrs. Rosa, who with a kind smile decided to check if her assistant is not being lazy. However, in a moment, the woman fiercely shouted at the cook and ordered him to return to work immediately, which greatly frightened the poor fellow. Ryo hurried to defend his friend and assured the woman that Kane's culinary talent had become a true treasure for them. Rosa jokingly called it simple flattery, but the guy stood firm in his position. Then the old woman quietly added that Kane's parents were once famous adventurers. Ryo listened to her respectfully, understanding from whom the boy inherited his character. The woman admitted that after their death she raised the orphan by herself and is very worried about him, even though she seems too strict. She awkwardly apologized for the long conversations, but Ryo warmly replied that he was pleased to hear such a story. Rose glanced at the stove and whispered that the happy face of her pupil, while working, finally brought peace to her heart. Finally, the woman sincerely asked Ryo once again to take care of the boy, who was at that moment smiling while frying another cutlet. Another working day was in full swing, and satisfied customers were clearing out the fresh bread. The last vegetables disappeared from the shelves, finally allowing a sigh of relief. Suddenly, the door opened, and Sato joyfully greeted the guest at the threshold. It was Sarah who stunned everyone at the threshold with the news. She had arranged a meeting with the Merchants Guild. The boy immediately asked what Natasha replied to that. As it turned out, due to the crazy influx of clients lately, Natasha also agreed without hesitation. The master just blinked in surprise, while Sato smiled mysteriously. Finally, the young man solemnly announced that they were opening their own store for the Sato Trading Company. Without wasting a second, he called on the team to immediately start planning. Only 2 days had passed, and the events moved to a large stone building in the city center. Gathered around the large table, the partners spread out the documents and began the first official meeting. Ryo gathered his friends for the first meeting of the Sato Trading Company to finally discuss the plan for opening their first store. His blonde-haired companion immediately got down to business, asking what kind of store he wanted to open. Natasha from the Trade Guild joined the discussion, genuinely happy to see old acquaintances again. The blonde immediately expressed her first concern. Regular guests simply won't be able to visit a store that is too small. Ryo replied that the cart trade is going wonderfully, so he would like a fairly spacious establishment where guests could eat inside. The hot chef immediately responded to the question about other ideas. The passionate chef picked up the topic and stated that he doesn't care about the format. The main thing is to be able to cook tons of delicious food. However, his blonde-haired companion was still in doubt. She advised starting with a small takeaway point, to not worry at all about the crowd and the hustle. However, the guy insisted on a full hall, as he wanted to personally see the satisfied faces of the guests during the meal. Natasha immediately warned about the expenses. A large establishment will require many waiters, which will instantly inflate the budget. Ryo tried to justify himself, but the opponent merely reminded him of the complex duties of the staff. The girl candidly summarized that the guy imagines this business quite differently than she does. But suddenly the boy pondered, and a mysterious smile appeared on his face. A brilliant plan was born in his mind. Ryo's idea was simple. No waiters, just a counter where guests order themselves, pay immediately, and pick up their food. The boy realized that in this medieval world, no one had ever even heard of fast food. The girls held their breath, as such a system allowed for managing a huge establishment without unnecessary hassle. Natasha estimated that, thanks to the cart skill, even the considerable expenses for setting up would pay off, and the very format of the store sounded surprisingly appealing. Natasha eagerly offered her help in realizing the idea, to which Ryo sincerely thanked her. She immediately thought of the available space and suggested to take a look at it. The rent of 4 million crowns fit perfectly into their budget. Natasha recommended entrusting the repairs to the builders from the trading company Dolhoff, the best craftsmen in the city of Solon. She suggested officially introducing them to their company through the guild, and Rio gratefully agreed. Rio's partner reminded that their total budget is 15 million crowns. Natasha handed them an envelope with a detailed plan and a large patterned key. When everything was decided, the company finally set off to inspect the premises. In a few days, they were on site. The two-story house turned out to be huge, but it was perfect for their idea. Rio, along with his companions, stopped in front of the building, acknowledging its appearance as quite impressive. A short, bearded man named Dolkov came out to meet them along with his assistant, Yule. The guest warmly greeted Rio, whose recent successes had already been the talk of the town. The news about obtaining a personal seal in such a short time quickly became the main topic of discussion. While Dolkov laughed heartily, Rio awkwardly tried to understand the reason for such attention towards him. The builder recalled the numerous special requests in the order, which the guy called a great honor. They sealed the agreement with a firm handshake, promising to make every effort for the success of the venture. Dolkov immediately got to work and ordered Yule to measure the area of the first floor. Thanks to the girl's magical abilities, the calculations were ready instantly, surprising those present. Yule calmly announced that the area of the premises is about 200 square limitations. The light-haired companion suggested setting up a kitchen on the first floor and an office on the second. Dolkov listened to her wishes and asked her to describe the overall planning of the establishment in more detail. When the conversation turned to the installation of standard kitchen equipment, Rio suddenly hesitated. The customer's statement that they would not need either the stove or the refrigerator completely shocked the master. He decisively reached out his hand and loudly called for the magical stall. Rio explained with a smile to the puzzled blacksmith that all of this was possible only thanks to his unique skill. In an instant, the guy transformed the structure into a modern, shiny kitchen with a stove and sink, leaving those present speechless in shock. He calmly added that a magical storage was installed below, and the astonished master could barely utter that even a spatial box had been integrated here. The old man simply couldn't believe his eyes, as creating such complex equipment with just skill seemed unimaginable. The young man handed over a sheet with additional wishes, and the blacksmith acknowledged that he now understood perfectly why Lord Cerrito was so interested in him. The new requirements included a large oven, a meat grinder, and a powerful fryer. And although the dwarf had never done anything like it, he confidently agreed to take on the job. Then the satisfied master inquired about the number of seats for guests, for which Rio sincerely thanked him. He pointed to the spacious hall in the second floor, planning to place as many as 120 chairs there, although the blacksmith thought such a number was too large. With such a scale of the building, even further expansion of the hall was not a problem, so the boy could only hope for successful cooperation. Suddenly, the blacksmith looked seriously at the boy and warned that he and his assistant had already prepared a preliminary estimate for the project. Rio turned around in confusion to the voice of his companion, who was holding papers with calculations in her hands. She stunned him with the news, her face pale with fear. The budget exceeded the planned amount by 3 million crowns. The master, with a lush mane, calculated that the new establishment is lacking about 3 million over budget. Hearing that the amount could approach 20 million, the girl simply bit her lip in surprise. The master with the lush mane added that the exact figures will come later, but the minimum threshold will definitely not drop below 18 million. Rio awkwardly apologized for such a heavy burden, but Sarah firmly took the papers to immediately start rewriting the plan. The boy looked after her in surprise. He admitted that he knows nothing about accounting, but the girl urged him to fully trust her. Sarah exclaimed with a smile that it was precisely for this reason that she once left her native village, promising to do everything for the success of the new shop. 3 days have passed. The envelope rustled quietly in his hands. A letter with the prices finally arrived from the Dolhoff Trading Company, which the guys immediately took to Sarah. The girl held her breath. The total cost of the equipment and interior amounted to exactly 20 million crowns, just as Mr. Dolhoff had said. At Rio's concerned question about her progress, she only smiled wearily but proudly. Despite all the difficulties, in these 3 days she completed almost all the work and now only needed to adjust the calculations to the new budget. The boy warmly thanked her for her help, after which they decided to head to the Merchant Guild to discuss the details. Sarah looked seriously at the guy and warned that she would explain the details later, but for now, they would definitely have to ask for a loan from the guild. Sato doubted whether the guild would agree to such an adventure, but the girl confidently assured him that she would do everything possible and take this matter into her own hands. They decided on this. The presentation was scheduled for the next morning. The expenses for equipment reached the limit, so there was nowhere to retreat. The boy silently wished her success, understanding that now everything depended only on Sarah. The next morning, just before the meeting began, the guys nervously asked their friend if she was ready, to which she confidently nodded, although cold sweat was trickling down her face. Together, they approached the majestic building of the Merchants Guild, where their fate was to be decided. Inside, they were warmly greeted by a friendly employee in glasses, noting that the Sato Trading Company's team was already waiting. She smiled as she escorted the guests to the office. The girl invited everyone to sit down, while Sato began to explain the essence of their new plan. As soon as they settled at the table, Sarah handed over the prepared papers and asked to review them first. The employee eagerly took the document, promising to study it immediately. She was intently flipping through the pages while a tense silence filled the office. Finally, the girl lifted her shocked gaze from the report and slowly read the amount. They needed a loan of as much as 25 million crowns. The stern representative of the guild in glasses looked up from the documents and dryly warned that she had a few questions. Sarah focused. The official noted that the loan amount is too high for their scale and suggested making do with existing equipment, but Sarah immediately cut her off. Their kitchen tools are made only to order, so there will be no compromises here. Then the woman asked about the refund plan, and Sarah calmly handed her the prepared documents. She started to study the documents, mentally marveling at Sarah's meticulousness. The pages contained detailed reports on the sales of field kitchens and the speed of customer service, which guaranteed stable debt repayments even with interest. The plan seemed completely clear to the official, and Sarah added that she had detailed everything down to the smallest details by month. Moreover, they were ready to repay the debt in kind if necessary, thanks to their special skill in field cooking. However, the guild representative decided to calculate the worst-case scenario and asked about the collateral. Sarah calmly explained that in that case, they would pay with the food products created by her magical ability. This impressed the guild representative, as, thanks to the power of the Sato Trading Company, these supplies could be stored almost indefinitely. Under such conditions, the guild would have certainly suffered no losses, so the dispute finally subsided. Moreover, the girl in glasses remembered that, although Sato's company had no assets, Mr. Rio held the status of a seal-bearer. And when the influential Fostria family stood behind the boy as a guarantor, any doubts of the guild were completely dispelled. Sato looked questioningly at Natasha, waiting for her final decision. She slowly closed the folder and confirmed that she had thoroughly studied Sarah's plan and fully approved it. She promised to immediately hand over the papers to the head of the guild, which made Sarah simply beam with happiness. Natasha reassured the company, adding that the status of seal-bearer guarantees the successful approval of the application. Once outside, they were finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. Kane and Sato sincerely thanked Sarah for her help, as all her efforts in teaching finally paid off. Suddenly, Sato started talking about new positions, which greatly surprised his friends. The boy thoughtfully added that he had been contemplating the future opening of their shop for a long time. He understood that he could not manage alone with a large staff, so he decided to divide the management. Sato offered Kane to head the kitchen, and he resolutely promised to do everything possible in his new position. Starting with Kane, the boy recorded his consent and moved on to the next important appointment. Now it was Sarah's turn, to whom Sato unexpectedly offered the position of vice president of the company. The girl froze in place from shock, not believing her own ears. She confidently agreed to accept this challenge, and Sato happily welcomed his new deputy. Rio stood in the room, eagerly waiting for an important decision. Suddenly, an excited Sarah burst into the room with letters from the guild in her hands. She joyfully exclaimed that their loan was fully approved, and the guy finally breathed a sigh of relief. However, the joy quickly faded when he looked at the amount of rent and payments that a regular food stall simply could not cover. Moreover, prices were biting, and ahead there were significant expenses for salaries. It was necessary to look for staff, but the guy didn't even imagine how many people they would need. Sarah thoughtfully began to calculate that they would need at least 8 people for the cashier work and cleaning. The kitchen needs 4 more cooks for frying and washing dishes, the assistant added. Something had to be urgently figured out. Maintaining a team of 12 employees seemed almost like an impossible task for Ryo. Suddenly, the boy had a realization. He recalled his conversation with Natasha and suggested posting the job vacancy on the guild's bulletin board, which Sarah really liked. He decisively slapped his palm on the table. The small fee for publication was not a problem, as their proposal would definitely be seen by a lot of people in the guild. Sarah energetically grabbed a pen, urging her friends to immediately write a job recruitment announcement. Suddenly, her hand froze. The girl asked in confusion what name they should give to the establishment. A friend cheerfully suggested naming the establishment Ryo Burger, making Ryo only awkwardly smile. The boy sought to find a simple and familiar name that would bring joy to people from delicious food. At that moment, a wonderful idea was born in his mind. Soon the townspeople were already crowding around the bulletin board, discussing the unexpected news from Sato Company. A bright poster called chefs and staff to the new establishment, Salty Burger, with very favorable conditions. Ryo smiled confidently. They would definitely find people. The dark-haired girl was noticeably anxious, wondering who she would have to work with now. The team made every effort in preparing for the first meetings with the candidates. The day of the interview has come. Ryo and Sarah peered out from behind the screen in shock, not understanding how to choose the best among such a huge crowd. In the queue, the boy recognized a few of his regular customers with surprise. Both assistants were already waiting for him, and the boy confidently commanded to start the selection. He was genuinely happy that he quickly gained trust in Solon and became one of them. Sarah energetically promised to call the first candidate right away and headed to the door. Suddenly, Kane stopped them and timidly asked for a brief conversation face to face. The assistant was noticeably nervous, trying to find the right words and warn about everything in advance. When he blurted out that his wife would come for the interview today, the hosts were so surprised that their jaws nearly dropped. Shocked, Sarah even screamed upon hearing about his marriage 3 months ago, although the groom himself had asked not to be distracted. The master quickly regained his composure and calmly reassured his friend. Kane explained that his beloved was interested in this vacancy herself, but asked not to make any concessions for her. The young man assured that he would evaluate her completely impartially, and the grateful man smiled with relief. Finally, the office door opened, announcing the official start of the interview. The first candidate entered the room timidly, and the host warmly invited him to sit down. A young man introduced himself as Alan and politely greeted the examiners. The employer glanced at the application and asked if he really wanted to work with clients. The man calmly explained that he possesses the skill of physical endurance, which allows him to work for hours without any fatigue. The girl was surprised why he came here specifically, as such a skill would be perfect for adventurers, but he confidently stated that it would definitely be useful to them. The candidate explained that he had always wanted to work in the service industry, and the guy opposite mentally agreed that such an assistant would be helpful to them. Moreover, his skill did not increase strength at all, so it was almost useless for dangerous adventures. The conversation did not end there, and they moved on to the next questions. The door finally closed, leaving the boy alone with thoughts about how serious this Alan turned out to be. The candidate politely bowed once more at the end, thanking for the time given. The interviewer sighed, realizing how different everyone's abilities were and how difficult it would be to make a choice, after which he invited the next guest. Suddenly, the door creaked open loudly, causing his heart to tighten with a bad premonition. Beside him stood a comrade who, at the most inopportune moment, began to ponder aloud what Kane's wife was like. At the doorstep appeared a girl with a bandage over her eye, who pompously declared herself the demon Kutor, crawling out of deep darkness. The attendees were simply stunned in place, with their jaws dropped at such a statement. The girl dramatically covered her eye with a black glove and pompously announced that her name was Kutor and she was a demon who had just crawled out of the darkest depths into this world. A deep and utterly awkward silence fell. The blonde from the admissions committee finally couldn't hold back and cautiously asked if this fearsome demon had really come to apply for the position of cook. The candidate instantly dropped all pretenses and greeted those present in a very friendly manner, which greatly surprised the interviewing guy. But the calm lasted exactly a second. The girl again theatrically threw her head back and shouted about her absolute creation, into which she had poured her whole soul. And in a moment, she awkwardly turned away and quietly mumbled that she just really wants to cook. The boy at the table mentally diagnosed her with an obvious condition, a severe and incurable form of 8th grader syndrome. When he gently suggested dropping the subject, the frightened Kutor immediately waved her hands and agreed to speak normally. Just before that, in response to the question of why she decided to apply right now, the girl with a sly smile stated that the wills of darkness forbid saying such things out loud. She hurriedly dismissed the image of a dark queen and sincerely shared that she had helped her mother at the stove since childhood and had independently studied cooking. However, as soon as the boy asked about her special abilities, the girl proudly placed her hands on her hips and smiled mysteriously again. Kutor sharply lifted the black band and loudly shouted that in her left eye lives the power of ancient beasts, absolute thermal perception. However, the next second she casually explained again that she simply knows how to determine the temperature of food by sight, like a built-in thermal imager. Finally, the eccentric cook dramatically extended her hand forward, assuring her new comrades that she eagerly awaited the start of their great joint work. At the end of the interview, the guy asked the girl to say a few final words, making her think seriously. She bowed low and quietly promised to give her all, to which the examiner politely nodded. As soon as the door closed behind her, the boy exhaled weakly, struck by such an extraordinary personality. He admitted that they encountered an extremely strange candidate, and the shocked blonde could only helplessly agree. The girl seemed diligent at heart, but the final decision depended on a comparison with other candidates. The partner with burning eyes called her very cheerful, and no one disagreed with that. The door opened again for the next candidate. The blonde glanced at the papers and let out a sigh of relief as the turn had finally reached the last participant. The door creaked piercingly, marking the beginning of the final interview that was to put an end to this selection process. The boy invited the guest in, suddenly remembering that they still hadn't met Kane's wife. Simple shoes appeared at the doorstep, and a quiet, polite voice of the newcomer was heard from the corridor. When a familiar head appeared in the doorway, the examiners instantly had a hunch about who the last candidate was. All three froze with their mouths wide open in complete surprise. Before them stood the radiant Khan, who greeted them with a sweet smile and introduced herself. The boy timidly asked Hannah if she was Kane's wife, to which she shyly smiled, realizing that the man had already told everything. She sincerely thanked for the care of her husband and added that they had previously worked together at Aunt Rose's hotel. When the girl at the table asked if Hannah was applying for a position in customer service, she confidently nodded, confirming her considerable experience working in a hotel. Suddenly, her special skill as a military advisor appeared on the system screen, which Hannah considered very useful for the restaurant as well. She proudly explained that this ability allows her to see the actions and state of 10 people around her so clearly as if they were lying in her palm. The assistant was so astonished by such a statement that she gaped in surprise, noting that with such talent one could easily build a career in the army. However, Hannah just blushed and gently confessed that she simply didn't want to part with her beloved, making the whole team mentally chuckle at such candid love boasts. The girl reassured those present that there were plenty of capable workers left in the old hotel, and Aunt Rosa had readily given her consent. The assistant even worried whether there would now be problems at the former institution. But Hannah cheerfully added that she and Kane still planned to open their own business someday, so the boy had no choice but to agree with a smile. On this note, the interview was declared concluded, and the guest, warmly bidding farewell, was the first to head home. Now the team faced a stack of applications, and it was finally time to choose whom they would hire. A few days have passed. The young leader asked the assistants to name the best candidates, and the girl cheerfully announced that she had already prepared all her notes. The first candidates were Alan and Hannah, who were to provide the team with reliable support. Rio suggested appointing Hannah as the leader due to her skills as a military advisor, and Sarah fully agreed. Among dozens of capable candidates, Kutor stood out, whose experience and enthusiasm were beyond doubt, although her appearance made the team nervous. Sarah doubted the girl's ability to communicate, but Kane assured her that it would be fun with her. Kane suddenly declared to Rio and Sari his desire to work specifically with Kutor. Sarah was even more surprised when Rio also called the girl interested. Rio noted to himself that Kutor looked more serious than her appearance suggested, so no problems at work were anticipated. Kane resolutely promised to take full responsibility as the head chef. Sarah and Rio agreed after their chef's passionate speech. Rio smiled and raised his thumb. Kutor at home puzzled over the advertisement of an unknown trading company. Suddenly, the sound of carriage wheels and the voice of the postman was heard from the street. The girl opened the envelope and froze upon reading about her successful interview. In her joy, she shrieked at the top of her lungs, scaring the birds and angering the sleepy neighbors. The girls proudly showcased the new uniform, eagerly awaiting the first reaction. Rio breathed a sigh of relief, as the custom-made outfit had arrived just in the nick of time. The boy quietly cleared his throat, preparing himself for a serious tone. He greeted those present and once again introduced himself as the head of the Sato Trading Company. The team happily responded to his proposal to review the future workplaces. The large two-story building was already fully ready for opening. Passers-by on the street stopped and curiously examined the strange sign with the burger illustration. Rio warned that their establishment would operate under completely different rules than ordinary taverns, and the tired dwarf builder merely sighed heavily. The boy gestured for everyone to follow him for a detailed tour. The first stop was the counter, where the waiters were to take orders from the customers. The cook curiously asked for details, but the boy only mysteriously promised to tell everything a little later. Then they moved to the kitchen, which sparkled with impeccable cleanliness. Nearby, there was a bright hall with comfortable tables and soft sofas. But the team was most impressed by the deep fryer, which was custom-made at Rio's request. The boy looked around in surprise as the new space resembled a classic Japanese burger joint down to the smallest details, even though it was entirely made of wood. The rows of neat tables evoked a poignant feeling, as if he had found himself back in his former world. The strict master submitted the work and promised to help with the equipment if needed, while the young man warmly thanked him for his efforts. Gathering the employees, he confidently announced that he would now explain the entire work process in detail. He immediately introduced the leaders. The beautiful Sarah headed the hall, while the energetic Kane took command of the kitchen. To facilitate learning, the boy called everyone to follow him for a visual demonstration. At the counter, he detailed the first step to Sarah, to take the order and immediately pass the check to the kitchen. He showed the ticket and explained that the issuance of ready meals would take place according to these matches. The assistant was genuinely surprised by such an unprecedented innovation, but the young man assured that everyone would quickly get used to this effective system. On the hot grill, a juicy patty sizzled loudly for the first burger. The boy startled in surprise and turned around at the sound. Kane confidently directed the process by the stove, while his assistant, with a bandage over her eye, watched in awe at the unseen culinary magic. As he was convinced of the chef's skill, the young man mentally sighed upon hearing the assistants enthusiastically discuss the unique recipe. Ultimately, he instructed the employees to break into small groups so that they could bond and become friends before the grand opening of the establishment. Rio decided to start staff training from the basic step, accepting the first order. He himself acted as a client and ordered a set with a teriyaki burger for 800 crowns. The waitress immediately redirected the order to the kitchen, where Kutor was already waiting in the wing. The girl screamed as she summoned the hellish flames while her partner begged her not to burn the meat to ashes. Surprisingly, the cooked cutlet was oozing juice and looked very appetizing. Kane quickly gathered the order and proudly announced its readiness. Then Rio asked Mr. Allen to play the role of a waiter, and he obediently agreed. A hot burger with a large portion of fries was waiting for him on the tray. The red-haired girl enthusiastically praised Kane for his work, while Rio was already looking for the next volunteer. Allen tried to amicably serve the dish, but his tense smile turned out to be so predatory and eerie that it frightened everyone around. Next, Rio demonstrated a special cabinet with a waste bin where guests would dispose of their waste themselves. One of the employees clarified how to handle food scraps after a meal in such a system. The girls quickly realized the advantages. This approach significantly simplifies the work as they only have to collect the empty trays. Rio urged everyone to unite and thoroughly study these rules before the opening day of the establishment. The boy nervously smiled, realizing that they had finally reached this stage, although there was much less time left than he had anticipated. The gaze froze in anxiety, and only one feverish question spun in the mind. Would they make it in time for the opening? The main character gathered the team and confidently announced that the time had come and everyone must be on alert. Meanwhile, in the city, people were already eagerly looking at the flyers for the new eatery, planning to drop by for lunch. Near the new sign Salty Burger, they were calling for the first customers, happily inviting passers-by to come inside. A crowd quickly formed in the hall, so the polite cashier asked people to line up at the counter. The work instantly took off, and the dark-haired girl at the counter enthusiastically picked up the first order for a teriyaki set. The red-haired colleague skillfully took orders at the cash register, greeting each guest with a friendly smile. The light-haired assistant also gave her all, sincerely thanking the visitors for their visit on opening day. The main character looked around the cozy hall with relief, and mentally noted that the morning had started surprisingly well. It seemed that the exhausting training had finally paid off completely, as the staff worked flawlessly. However, the calm did not last long. One of the cooks decided to personally deliver the order. The boy loomed over the terrified client with such a beastly expression that he trembled with fear. Another assistant, overwhelmed with strong anxiety, trembled so much that he nearly knocked the plate over onto the guest. The main character watched this spectacle with a nervous smile, realizing that they all still had much to learn. Fortunately, the girls at the table didn't notice anything, savoring the light vegetarian burgers with delight. Rio brought wonderful news. Kane's vegetarian burgers instantly became a hit, which made the chef himself beam with joy. Kane pondered for a long time over the recipe for hearty fast food without a gram of meat, and now he was genuinely proud of his masterpiece. The boy made a bet on a healthy menu and decided to replace the heavy cutlet with salted eggs, which perfectly satisfied his hunger. Moreover, previously, regular burgers were bought very sluggishly in the morning, while this option was perfect for starting the day. Rio agreed, adding that it resembles a convenient sandwich that can be quickly grabbed on the go. Meanwhile, Sarah was devouring the treats with a sparkle in her eyes, saying that such a light dish would definitely win over the girls, as it could be eaten in large quantities. Rio silently watched this, horrified at the huge pile of empty wrappers in front of the girl. At her friend's cautious question about the amount she had eaten, Sarah simply apologized guiltily under the shocked gazes of the guys. Meanwhile, a luxurious carriage rolled down the street, and passers-by whispered in surprise, recognizing the sign of the Vestry House. Such a sight was extremely rare here. Suddenly, the rumble of wheels came from the street, making the girl alert. A luxurious carriage stopped right in front of their establishment, which greatly surprised the girl. The passenger sighed with relief and took the first step onto the ground. The chef's eyes widened in shock as they peered out the door. In front of them stood a lavishly dressed young man with a confident smile, who immediately asked if Rio was there. Suddenly, the girl screamed in fear and, stuttering, pointed her finger at the entrance, causing Rio to turn around in confusion. On the doorstep appeared the smiling Lord Cerrito, accompanied by the butler Modon, and greeted the boy on his opening. The aristocrat pressed his finger to his lips and asked to keep his visit a secret, while Rio mentally worried about the fate of their cart outside. While the Lord was asking for a burger to be brought to him immediately, the assistant at the cash register was frozen in shock at how easily Rio was communicating with the nobleman. Hearing about the unusual ordering system, the interested guest chose a set with a beef burger, and the girl immediately rushed to fulfill the order. A hot burger and golden fries landed on the tray. Rio escorted the esteemed guest to the table, and he curiously examined the unusual interior of the restaurant. The trembling waiter placed the dish on the table and silently begged for someone to take his place. The aristocrat carefully examined the refreshments, noting to himself that externally they were almost indistinguishable from the usual. He confidently brought the burger to his mouth. One bite, and the world around him seemed to explode with astonishment. After chewing, Cerrito exclaimed enthusiastically that this beef surpasses any other meat in tenderness and fattiness. Savoring the fries, the Lord tried to uncover the secret of the meat supply, but the staff politely refused, citing company confidentiality. At that moment, in the kitchen, Qutor was blushing with happiness, as the great ruler himself was eating the potatoes she had personally fried. The light-haired young man sincerely praised the dish, and the cook beamed with happiness, stammering from such honor. The boy squinted suspiciously. His face broke into a smile again, and he admitted that he adores potatoes, so he always asks to have such a delicacy prepared for him. The girl was almost over the moon from such a compliment, and promised to do her best. As a farewell, the guest joyfully waved goodbye and promised to host a lavish banquet for them next time. Rio smiled as he saw off the visitor, while his companions stood nearby with grim faces, sensing the deadly tension. As soon as the door closed behind the guest, the friends pounced on the bewildered Rio, panicking over the unexpected praise from such an influential person. Rio suddenly fainted, right in the middle of the street, and a frightened Sarah rushed to him, begging him to open his eyes. The boy's consciousness was rapidly fading, plunging him into complete darkness. Suddenly, a blinding white light flashed. When the boy opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Sarah's happy and tearful face. The girl explained that he fainted during delivery, and the doctor added that they are in the palace infirmary. Rio lay silently on the bed, examining the unfamiliar room. The doctor explained that the cause of the fainting was mild magical poisoning due to a sudden excessive release of energy. The old man handed the boy a strange, bubbling flask, which left him speechless at the sight of it. Sarah sternly demanded to take the medicine immediately, despite the panic in the boy's eyes. Despite the patient's weak objections, the doctor ordered him to rest for the remainder of the day. Under the watchful gaze of his friend, Rio gulped down the disgusting potion in one go with terrified eyes. The boy tried to talk about the unfinished work, but Sarah confidently interrupted him, putting health first. He apologetically asked for forgiveness for the trouble, although the girl began to blame herself for not noticing the danger earlier. She could no longer hold back her emotions, and through tears exclaimed that he always exhausts himself to the point of half-death and makes everyone worry madly. Rio finally opened his eyes and quietly called Sarah. The girl confessed that she was going crazy with fear and couldn't shake the thought that he would never wake up again. The young man lowered his head and sincerely apologized for overestimating his abilities and causing everyone to worry so much. She looked into his eyes and begged him not to exhaust himself like that anymore, as his death would break the hearts of all his loved ones. The boy agreed that making friends suffer was simply absurd and firmly promised to be more careful from now on. Suddenly, Sir Modon, who had just entered the room, interrupted the conversation and greeted Rio with relief at his return to consciousness. The man smiled kindly and jokingly apologized for interrupting their important conversation. He simply conveyed the request to work at a calm pace and not to overload himself, and Rio gratefully accepted this concern. Hearing this, Sarah happily exclaimed and firmly clenched her fists. Rio confidently smiled and said that he would need her support starting tomorrow. The next morning, the boy was already standing by the wooden counter, preparing to test his strength. Sarah brought him a bag of materials, ready to help with everything. Rio extended his hand forward, summoned a glowing magical circle, and began to transform the pile of earth into solid stone. The majestic castle silently watched the beginning of their new venture. 5 days of hard work had passed, and under the wooden awning, a colossal white mountain of ready salt had finally grown. Rio, wearily, but with great relief, exhaled. His companion exclaimed excitedly that it was finally over. Looking at the result, Lord Cerrito admitted that without the boy's help, the city would have been doomed. He sincerely praised Rio for the excellent work done in such a short time, which surprised the boy. Suddenly, the noble lord slowly bowed his head. Rio's companion was taken aback, not believing that the aristocrat was bowing to them. But Cerrito calmly replied that it was quite natural. Moved, Rio simply thanked him sincerely in response. Cerrito placed his hand on his chest and called the boy a true savior of the entire Fostria region. The Lord slowly extended his hand to him. He suggested that we be friends both at work and in everyday life from now on. A pleasant, friendly smile shone on Cerrito's face. Rio gladly responded to this gesture, calling the offer a great honor. Soon they returned home. Rio awkwardly apologized to the assistant for his long absence, but the girl smiled and assured him that they managed everything. At the doorstep, Rio and Sarah were joyfully greeted by Hana, along with a colleague, sincerely welcoming them back. Sarah assured in response that she and Rio were ready to return to work in the store immediately and that they could be relied upon. Instead, Kana unexpectedly pulled out 2 theater tickets she had received from an acquaintance. Rio naively suggested changing the schedule so she could go there with Kane, but the girl objected and insisted that they take the tickets for themselves. She merely sighed wearily and reminded Rio that he had been working continuously for the benefit of the guild for the past few days. She firmly poked him with her finger, demanding that he take a break immediately as he was tirelessly working even at the bench. Under such pressure, Rio gave in and agreed to accept the tickets, recalling that Sarah had also recently complained about this. Hana did not stop there and slyly squinted at the girl. Sarah instantly flushed with color from shock upon hearing her friend's direct question. Hana openly teased her about the romantic outing to the theater alone with Rio, while the boy himself stood nearby with a comically puzzled expression. From the street came only Sarah's indignant squeak, who was trying to deny everything, while her friend cheerfully wished them to have a good time together. Sarah appeared at the door and awkwardly apologized for being late, as the meeting took more time than she had expected. Rio got the tickets and finally suggested setting off. On the way, he noticed that the outfit suited her exceptionally well, and a flustered Sarah quietly thanked him for the compliment. They walked leisurely down the city street past other pedestrians. On the way, the boy asked if she liked the theater. Sarah smiled sincerely and admitted that she hadn't watched a performance in a very long time. She recalled how traveling troupes used to come to her native village, whose performances she always awaited with anticipation. The girl asked if Mr. Rio often goes to the theater, but he just awkwardly hesitated. Hearing that the boy hadn't seen a single play since childhood, Sarah was literally stunned with amazement. She passionately stated that without exhibitions, he loses a lot of life's joys, forcing Rio to justify himself. Sarah added that although the actors are amateurs, they are very popular, so she herself is extremely nervous before the first screening. Suddenly, the girl exclaimed joyfully upon noticing the theater building. Looking at her happy face, Rio involuntarily felt a pleasant thrill himself. Ahead rose a majestic building, in front of the entrance of which a noisy crowd of spectators had already gathered. Sarah was pulling Rio with all her might, begging him to hurry before the other spectators took the best seats in the hall. The girl quickly chose a good position, and they settled down next to each other, enjoying the wonderful view of the stage. She excitedly began to recount the plot of a tragic love story between 2 feuding noble families, while Rio merely smiled, comparing what he heard to the famous tale of Romeo and Juliet. Only a few minutes remained until the start, and the boy eagerly looked around the Solon Theater Hall, waiting for the performance. The performance began with a heart-wrenching scene where the main character, in tears, begged the heavens to answer why fate was so cruel to her. The spotlight illuminated a solitary figure on stage, mourning lost love amidst the quiet sighs of the audience. These words about the power of fate made Rio think seriously. The actor's lines astonishingly resonated with his thoughts. He recalled the unexpected meeting with Sarah, without which he would never have met his loyal friends and Lord Cerrito. The tragedy on stage reached its peak when Leonardo, through tears, renounced his beloved for the honor of his family, leaving the girl in despair. While desperate stage cries echoed around, Rio quietly smiled, finally believing in the existence of fate. But the calm did not last long. Irritated, Sarah sharply nudged him with her elbow, demanding that he not get distracted from the most important moment of the performance. Trying to calm his friend, the young man suddenly awkwardly noticed that she was tightly gripping his hand in an emotional outburst. The sun was slowly hiding behind the roof of the exquisite theater building. Realizing her mistake, the girl instantly recoiled and screamed in shame, hiding her flushed face under his good-natured laughter. The curtain fell to the loud applause of the audience in the hall. Rio watched in shock as the tragic ending unfolded, while Sarah beside him was torn apart by tears over the hero's too cruel fate. The girl was choking on tears, shouting Leonardo's name throughout the theater. Suddenly, she turned around defiantly, demanding to discuss what she had seen immediately, to which Rio awkwardly suggested they grab a bite to eat first. Soon they were walking through the noisy streets of Solon. Passers-by walked by with bags from his own burger restaurant in their hands. Sarah looked around with interest. Looking at the satisfied customers, Rio felt a genuine pride in his work, and Sarah warmly supported his desire to move forward. Looking at the sunlit houses, he sincerely thanked the girl, as it was thanks to her that he found his new home here. Sarah immediately felt embarrassed by the sudden confession, and the guy added that he had been thinking about their meeting throughout the entire performance. He simply looked at her silently, with a warm smile. The girl turned around with a bright smile and promised to always be there, no matter what life brought them. They moved further down the street, cheerfully agreeing to celebrate the evening and finally discuss the performance. Rio cheerfully delivered orders, serving hot hamburgers to the visitors. A colleague called him for lunch. Sarah, with a huge appetite, devoured a giant burger, saying that this dish would never get boring. She joyfully bragged that she wasn't gaining any weight, making the guy quietly envy her metabolism. And her colleague sadly grabbed her sides because the uniform had become tight, so Rio warned her about the treacherous carbohydrates in potatoes. The girls exchanged puzzled glances. The boy explained to them the rules of healthy eating, which sounded like some kind of magic to the inhabitants of this world. Suddenly, a worried Alan approached them. He apologetically apologized for the ruined break and called Rio to follow him. An incredibly overweight young lord appeared in the hall, accompanied by a butler, and loudly demanded fresh French fries. Sarah and Rio stared in shock at the guest, recognizing him as Lord Cerrito. Rio approached closer, trying to make out his former acquaintance in this giant, fat man. He angrily confirmed his identity. Nearby, the butler Morden sighed heavily, pleading with Rio for help, as the young master's appetite had already exceeded all limits. He froze in place from shock upon learning that the ruler had rapidly gained weight due to constantly eating fries and burgers. It turned out that the ruler simply cracked them at night before going to sleep, and the servants could not stop him. The advisor lamented that this would hinder state affairs, and the boy sadly acknowledged the seriousness of the problem. The old man could hardly hold back tears of joy and tightly squeezed the boy's hands upon hearing his agreement to help. The fat man plaintively begged for at least a small exception for his beloved potatoes, but received a firm refusal. Even the girls did not hide their surprise at how much the ruler had let himself go. That's how the trouble turned out. Rio inquired about the plan and suggested creating simple dietary recipes. In response, the chef smiled mysteriously and hinted at one special ingredient. In front of them lay a block of fresh tofu that Rio had just recently learned to make. The young man decided to recreate a dish from his former home that he used to eat often. First, all of this was left to simmer in fragrant spices. Then, finely chopped fresh vegetables were added. The final touch is to add flour diluted in water for thickness. Rio smiled and urged his colleague to pay closer attention, as the most interesting part was about to begin. The sauce in the pan thickened quickly, releasing appetizing bubbles. As the final touch, he generously drizzled the hot mixture over the snow-white tofu cube. The exquisite and useful dish was fully prepared. The first spoon was put to use. The cook suggested that Cerrito try a sample, and he eagerly reached for the plate. The lord was taken aback. The delicate taste of the tofu perfectly complemented the rich, thick gravy. The girl next to her smiled and added that thanks to this dish, she once lost weight easily. Another guest eagerly devoured the tofu, predicting it would have tremendous sales success. Rio promised to develop a new menu, and the Lord happily acknowledged that he could now easily give up fatty potatoes. Suddenly, hurried footsteps were heard in the corridor. An urgent report from the Merchants Guild had arrived. The steward, with a look of concern on his face, handed a sealed envelope to his master. The Lord unfolded the letter, and in surprise his face changed. Sarito looked seriously at the chef and asked for an urgent service that only the Sato company could handle. The sudden demand forced the teenagers to panic. They were asked to save some village. The officer clarified that food aid needed to be delivered there, but the young man only asked in surprise what rescue had to do with it at all. When the name Mei was mentioned, Sarah froze in shock, and her companion exclaimed her name in confusion. The girl grabbed the collar and quietly confessed that her older sister lives in that village. The officer awkwardly closed his eyes, justifying that he did not know about the relative, and began to tell about the troubles on the outskirts of the settlement. There, right in the middle of the forest, under the incessant rain, resided the mighty Rain Dragon. The faces of the heroes instantly paled at the news they heard. The girl stood frozen in place, unable to believe the words of Lord Sarito. The legendary Rain Dragon had settled near the village of Mai. She immediately started asking whether the residents and her sister had survived. The man hurried to reassure her and assured her that everything was fine with the villagers. While the girl sighed with relief, the puzzled Rio asked what kind of creature this was. The Lord spoke of the colossal magical power of dragons and the curse of eternal rain that follows this monster. The water flows have already completely destroyed the agricultural lands, threatening to turn the entire valley into a huge lake. While the authorities are creating a support system, people urgently need emergency food supplies. However, no trade guild wanted to take on this job. Rio immediately wondered why the merchants were refusing to help the victims. Sarito sighed and explained that such urgent orders carry huge risks and do not yield any profit. The road was very long, and the protection of caravans near the dragon's lair cost a fortune. Despite everything, Rio confidently stated that the trading company Sarto would manage and demanded to be sent on his way immediately. Sarito looked closely at the boy and asked if he would accept this task, as the Rain Dragon was too dangerous and his life would be at risk. Rio confidently replied that he would definitely manage, and for Sarah's sake, he had no reason to refuse. Hearing this, Sarito smiled approvingly and promised to provide any assistance as the boy's bravery impressed him. They shook hands firmly, sealing the agreement. Meanwhile, the girls in the kitchen whispered anxiously. The news about the dragon seriously frightened them, but they could not refuse the Lord. Rio gathered the whole team and directly announced that he and Sarah would have to leave for a while. Hana immediately asked with concern who would take care of the restaurant while they were away. Rio calmly replied that he wanted to temporarily entrust the management to her, which left the girl speechless with surprise, and she confusedly poked herself with her finger. Rio explained his choice. Thanks to Khan's skill, he always keeps everyone in sight, and Sarah trusts her accounts unconditionally. Her husband smiled warmly and promised to help his beloved in everything so that she could cope with this difficult role. The new cook with an eye patch cheerfully vowed to sweep away any threat, while Kane laughed and reminded her that he wasn't going anywhere either. The whole team stood still in the dark backlight, mentally preparing for the hardest days of their lives. Rio hurried to reassure the confused Couture, assuring him that he did not need to apologize. He warmly thanked everyone present and announced that he was setting off on his journey. The red-haired girl smiled confidently, promising to keep an eye on the shop. In the evening, Rio met with his companion near the mountain of wooden boxes to discuss the plan of action before the dawn departure. They carefully checked the purchased items, dishes, clothing, medications, and camping gear for the upcoming camp. The companion glanced at the pile of cargo with fear, doubting whether they would be able to carry it all. Instead of an answer, the young man raised his hand, activating the magic of spatial storage. When the huge pile of things instantly disappeared into the portal, the girl could only gasp in astonishment. The wooden boxes obediently flew into another dimension. The boy happily added that thanks to the improvement of his skills, they wouldn't even need a regular tent. In the next moment, a huge dome of the field shelter rose before them. My friend was so taken aback by the beauty of the unfolded tent, which also radiated a strong magical protection. She laughed joyfully, sincerely praising Rio for his amazing reliability. The boy's gaze stopped on the happy face of his sister Sarah. He clenched his fist resolutely and promised himself that he would definitely protect everyone with this strength. The cart creaked peacefully along the forest road, while two young travelers enjoyed the pleasant ride. Meanwhile, two bandits were hiding in the thick bushes, looking for easy prey. Suddenly, a foreign leg blocked the carriage's path, and a sharp command to stop rang out. The traveler gasped in fear, but her companion urged her not to panic and to let them sort everything out. The robbers brazenly pulled out their weapons, demanding to be given all valuables immediately. The fox leader ordered them to shut their mouths and move, but suddenly, a blade flashed near his throat. The bandit froze instantly. He turned his head in fear and saw a menacing, dark silhouette behind him. It was a smiling warrior who mockingly inquired how these fools dared to attack an S-rank squad. In a moment, both robbers were tightly bound with ropes near a tree, and the swordsman called this encounter easier than breakfast. The terrified captives sincerely thanked the legendary group called Witch's Staff for the unexpected rescue. When Rio naively doubted the strength of the rescuers, his friend hissed at him in outrage. She whispered that there were only 3 legendary squads of that class in the entire kingdom, and one of them stood before them. The girls from the elite squad heard the whisper and kindly laughed, making the travelers awkwardly apologize. Lund suggested that Rio had come from distant lands, which is why he could not know about their squad, Witch's Staff. However, the leader inquired with considerable interest about the trading company Sato, on which Solon himself had high hopes. The elf noted that even ordinary magical boxes are rare, and this one is on a whole different level. And Damien added that every adventurer dreams of such a skill. The man admitted that he initially did not believe the rumors, but the gigantic toolbox dispelled all his doubts. Damien was sincerely fascinated by the guy, while the girls looked at the tent, protected by powerful magic, with surprise. It had already grown dark outside, so Lund suggested taking a break and continuing the work the next day. As a sign of gratitude, Rio invited his new acquaintances to dinner at his little restaurant, which intrigued the leader. Strange round sandwiches appeared before the guests, which the host called hamburgers. The beast woman was amazed by the ability of magic to keep food fresh, while the elf recalled that she had heard about this dish before. Lund resolutely decided to try the new product. All 4 bit off a piece simultaneously. The taste turned out to be luxurious. The elf held her breath in pleasure, while the leader shouted in astonishment about the hot juice that literally gushed from the tender meat. Damien assured that even in the capital, it was impossible to find such a delicacy, where each ingredient perfectly complemented the others. The beastly creature with a snout demanded a second helping, while the satisfied cook merely smiled, assuring that there would be enough food for everyone. Chewing a huge burger, with both cheeks full, the cat girl hopefully asked Rio if there were any leftovers. Rio smiled warmly, acknowledging that with such skills, the boy was rightly called the new star. Hearing the proposal to join the Witch's Staff squad, the young man was so surprised that he spat out his drink, an awkward refusal by the crackling fire. In a few days, the squad finally reached the village of Meimei. The clouds were quickly thickening. The downpour lashed the horses as the cart finally entered the streets of the settlement. The warrior grimly suggested that this storm was the result of the influence of the rain dragon. Sarah clenched her hands in a fervent prayer for her sister. The boy could only silently watch her anxiety. A sudden loud rumble tore through the wall of rain. The crowd in front began to scatter in panic, shouting about deadly danger. The heart froze from a terrible premonition. The only bridge over the river was completely destroyed by the raging flow of water. A downpour was flooding the village of Meimei, and the villagers watched in despair as their fields were completely destroyed. The governor's wife, Luna, understood that things were bad, as the water had washed away the only bridge and completely cut them off from assistance. Suddenly, through the thick wall of rain, the silhouette of a carriage flashed on the road. The astonished peasant pointed his finger at the unexpected cart. The moon was taken by surprise when a familiar girl's voice loudly called her through the roar of the water. Sarah jumped out of the carriage and rushed headlong to meet her older sister. Everyone quickly took shelter from the bad weather in the manor, where the host warmly welcomed the unexpected guests. The governor sincerely thanked them for their help, as without their presence, the fate of the settlement would have been hopeless. The man introduced himself as Justin, the ruler of these lands, and introduced the newcomers to his wife, Luna. In response, a boy named Rio introduced himself as the head of a trading company and added that he had appointed Sarah as his deputy. The sisters finally embraced, and Luna sighed with relief, although she still wondered how they managed to get through the ruined path. When Rio pointed confusedly at the broken stone blocks of the bridge, their companion from the bushes calmly promised to restore everything. The girl prayerfully clasped her hands and whispered an incantation, causing the mysterious seed before her chest to shine brightly. Justin only asked in shock, not understanding how an ordinary sprout could fix a gigantic structure. Flexible vines rapidly entwined the trunks of the trees. With a loud crash, the giant wooden beams fell to the ground, forming a sturdy crossing. The light-haired companion gasped in surprise, not believing her eyes, while Rio simply smiled calmly. The man in the bandana assured that his squad would rebuild the village with the help of engineering magic while the other fighters held the defense. The girl sighed with relief, calling the allies reliable, but immediately added that things in the village were quite bad. Most of the fields in the village of Mei are underwater, and the houses in the lowlands have been completely flooded due to the floods. Assessing the scale of the destruction, the builder in the bandana confidently stated that they would handle everything in just 3 days. The village elder was almost in tears of gratitude and entrusted them with the work, and the guests promised to start in the morning. The red-haired elf couldn't believe his ears, but the elder sadly confirmed that 3 days was the maximum they could still hold out. Then Rio inquired about their food situation, and the grim face of the elder confirmed his worst fears. The flood destroyed the crops in the fields and washed away almost all the supplies from the granaries, condemning people to hunger. Seeing the crying child with an empty plate, the companions realized that they could not delay in searching for food. Rio decisively smiled and ordered the immediate distribution of food to all hungry residents. The red-haired one jumped for joy, admitting that they themselves were quite hungry, which completely bewildered the poor eldest. The younger sister assured that there was no need to worry, although the older one still confusedly reminded about the complete lack of supplies. She sincerely believed that once Rio took on the case, he would definitely find a solution. The guy confidently clenched his fist, as only one special dish was perfect for mass food distribution. The hot broth instantly warmed the exhausted people from the inside. They eagerly emptied their bowls and joyfully exclaimed that they had never tasted anything more delicious. The queue obediently lined up near the large cauldrons. Rio, with a friendly smile, handed over the first bowl of hot pork soup from the trading company Sato. Rio, with a friendly smile, announced to the hungry villagers that the hot pork soup he had prepared specially at Sart's shop was already fully ready. The villagers immediately began to eat, marveling at how perfectly the miso broth combined with the meat and spices. They savored every spoonful of the hot dish with tender tofu and sincerely thanked for the rescue from hunger. The boy happily asked everyone to line up one by one, assuring them that there would be enough food for everyone. The villagers stretched out their empty bowls one by one, eagerly asking for seconds. Looking at the satisfied faces, the girls smiled joyfully, as the villagers had not been so lively for a long time. She smiled as she thought that the guy had won the hearts, or rather the stomachs, of the entire community on the first try. The elder, with a bowl in his hands, joyfully announced that thanks to Rio, the forces had returned, and called on everyone to rebuild the village together. Suddenly, a little dark-haired girl waved her hand and cheerfully demanded a second helping, making Rio feel embarrassed that she called him uncle. Slowly, the cat cart moved on. Rio was just happy that his hot meal was able to please everyone. The road led them further past cozy village houses. The boy asked if it was okay for Emil to help him, but the beast man confidently assured him that their combat squad would now handle the role of rear support excellently. Suddenly, Rio stopped abruptly, noticing a crowd of worried villagers ahead. The heavy iron hand suddenly dropped down, causing everyone to freeze in place. Suddenly, the crowd recognized the famous warrior Lund with surprise. The earth shook and split in half, creating a giant crater in the middle of the field. The red-haired boy cheerfully greeted the stunned Rio and thanked him for the delivered food. Lund calmly stated that he intended to dig a water reservoir at this location. While carrying the heavy box, the bewildered Rio tried to figure out the cause of the destruction, to which Lund candidly admitted his ability to control earth and stone. A huge stream of water rushed noisily into the pit, instantly filling a new lake under the astonished gazes of the villagers. The red-haired elf with a gentle smile raised his hand, skillfully directing the water element. Rio helplessly watched this miracle, not believing that a person could possess such powerful magic, while his companions had already moved on. The next target was an old house with a completely destroyed roof. They were joined by the elegant girl Yuffie, whom Rio immediately greeted warmly. The beast woman conspiratorially smiled and urged the boy to carefully watch the half-destroyed roof. Yuffie closed her eyes, clasped her hands in prayer, and began to quietly recite the words of an ancient spell. Suddenly, giant living vines burst from the wooden beams, rapidly entwining the entire building. The vines disappeared, leaving behind a perfectly restored roof, and the shocked Rio finally realized what S-rank adventurers were capable of. The distribution of today's portions has finally been completed, and grateful people sincerely thanked Emil for the help. Rio lowered his gaze to his own palm, tormented by the thought that he himself had hardly helped at all with the rebuilding of the settlement. Before my eyes, other allies appeared who easily shattered giant boulders and leveled the ground with their strength and magic. The boy merely sighed resignedly, realizing that he would never catch up to these giants. Suddenly, little Claire ran up to him with a fragrant loaf in her hands, which Rio immediately recognized as the girl from the recent food line. She pointed at him and loudly called him uncle, causing Rio to turn around in confusion. The boy asked if something happened, and the woman next to him awkwardly apologized. The girl definitely wanted to go together. The girl approached closer and sincerely thanked him for the delicious help. Her eyes sparkled with happiness as she began to share her impressions of the amazingly soft and tasty bread she had never tasted before. Nearby sat other warriors who were devouring the treats with great appetite and assured that they had never eaten anything better in their lives. Rio was so stunned by what he heard that he froze, his eyes wide open in surprise and confusion. The boy sincerely thanked in response and promised to cook something delicious for dinner again, making the girl jump with joy. Emil smiled contentedly beside him and warmly praised the boy for his excellent work. Since that moment, 3 days have passed unnoticed. Rio firmly clenched his fist, promising himself to do everything possible. The devastated village has finally been rebuilt and protected from new floods, allowing people to breathe a sigh of relief and sincerely thank their rescuers. But it was too early to relax. Ahead, the squad was waiting for an expedition into the forest to track the mysterious rain dragon. The group leader officially assigned Rio to maintain order, and the boy readily accepted this responsibility. They agreed to return immediately and warn the community if they found any traces of the monster. And judging by the weather, the chances of encountering the creature near the houses were minimal. The villagers warmly saw off Lady Yuffie's cart, shouting parting words after her. The last exchange of glances, and the travelers set off on their journey. But they did not know that the black dragon was already lurking on the neighboring mountain, coldly watching their every move. 3 days had passed since the start of the investigation by the witch's staff squad, and the tired knight sincerely thanked Rio for the help with food, although he merely waved it off modestly. Immediately after that, a noisy crowd of children surrounded the boy, demanding entertainment and food. To calm the little ones, Rio smiled and told them that in his homeland there is a special dish for such occasions. The day turned out to be sunny, so he suggested that everyone prepare lunch together outdoors, which caused a real explosion of joy among the children. To all inquiries about the menu, the chef only mysteriously raised a finger upwards and commanded to head to the clearing. The work was in full swing. The little helper diligently started chopping the vegetables into neat pieces. Soon, a large black cauldron was already hanging over the fire. The next step was to pour water over the mixture for slow simmering on low heat. Before this, all the ingredients were thoroughly sautéed together to release their juices. One of the boys remarked in surprise that it suspiciously resembled ordinary pork soup, but the chef assured him, all the magic is yet to come. With these words, Ryo took out and proudly showed the little ones the dark pressed tiles. A few cubes of a mysterious mixture bubbled as they flew straight into the hot water. The little ones grimaced in fear, as this thing looked like ordinary clay, and they seriously doubted whether it was even edible. On the table lay a piece of dry curry that was destined to forever change their perception of delicious food. The little ones peered into the pot, and just from the smell alone, their stomachs were already rumbling loudly. Before their eyes, the soup changed color, and a thick, appetizing aroma wafted through the air. Curious villagers began to gather around the delicious aroma. Ryo asked the children to wait a little longer, to which they happily nodded. Even the blonde girl ran closer and was almost drooling with pleasure. The men behind also did not hold back their appetite, so the guy assured that there would be enough food for everyone. To pass the time until the dishes were ready, the girl suggested reading a fairy tale to the little ones. She opened the book and spoke about the grandfather who went for firewood and the grandmother who was washing clothes by the river. Ryo listened calmly until suddenly the river brought a giant orange. Hearing that a boy had emerged from the fruit, the young man froze in thought. This was a pure copy of the legend of Momotaro. Only in the local version did the hero fight alongside 5 great dragons against the demon king himself. Ryo thoughtfully gazed into the distance, dreaming that the rain dragon would someday join them too. His thoughts were interrupted by a little girl who impatiently asked about dinner. The couple rose above the pot. The rice had boiled, the sauce had thickened, and all that was left was to serve everything on plates. Ryo smiled as he presented a huge plate of hot curry and announced that lunch was finally ready. The boy invited everyone to help themselves and began skillfully serving food onto plates. After tasting the first spoonful, the local aristocrat was stunned with surprise. The unusual dish pleasantly burned his tongue and made him want to eat more and more. The children squealed with excitement, and the cook simply asked them to calmly line up, promising that there would be enough portions for everyone. One of the girls proudly boasted that she had already managed to take a second helping, and the offended boy indignantly shouted that it was unfair. Observing the happy people, the aristocrat recalled that just recently this devastated settlement seemed doomed to die. Ryo simply smiled awkwardly, modestly replying that he just prepared some food. The elder addressed Ryo with deep gratitude, calling the arrival of his company a true salvation for the entire village. Ryo had already raised the spoon to finally taste it himself, but a sudden noise made him stop. The boy looked around in surprise, not understanding why it suddenly became so dark in the middle of a clear day. Right above their heads, a colossal white dragon spread its wings. The terrified crowd froze, unable to believe their own eyes. The monster swiftly descended for landing. Ryo froze, with a plate of hot curry in his hands when the monster's ominous command to come closer sounded. A huge reptilian eye fixed on the boy, and a low voice asked if he had prepared this dish. Suddenly, a magnificent white monster appeared before the boy. The giant dragon commanded to approach immediately and asked if he had prepared the hot dish. The young man froze in fear, frantically wondering what they could have done to anger this monster. He slowly stepped towards danger. There was no other choice anyway. With trembling hands, the boy extended the plate of curry right to the large white mouth. The dragon closed its eyes in anticipation. The young man watched the strange behavior of the beast in confusion. The long tongue instantly licked all the food off the plate. The forest trembled from the wild roar. The beast threw back its head and cried out that it was extraordinarily delicious. The surprised chef just realized that the monster simply wanted to eat, and it was already joyfully demanding a second helping. Hearing that the portion was small, the reptile calmly promised to become smaller. A bright flash forced the boy to cover his face with his hands from the powerful flow of magic. The light went out, and in place of the huge dragon, a small, smiling girl appeared. A sharp blow shook the ground as a mysterious guest landed barefoot in front of them. The company was simply left speechless from the surprise. Instead, the girl smiled sincerely and demanded that they bring her curry immediately. The elder humbly agreed to take her to the castle. In just a moment, she was devouring the hot dish with great appetite. Ryo could only stare in shock at the huge empty pot where not a crumb was left. A mountain of empty bowls quickly grew in order. Having eaten her fill, the guest lazily waved her hand and allowed any formalities to be cast aside. The elder hesitantly inquired whether it was correct to address her as Mrs. Ameria. Instead, she asked the name of her savior cook, and the boy introduced himself as Ryo. Her next whim completely baffled the boy as she ordered him to come up with a new name for her. The girl stared at him with wide eyes, waiting for a decision. Feverishly recalling the legends of the rain dragon, Ryo finally uttered the name, Lady Rai. Upon receiving the answer, the elder immediately got down to business and asked why she had suddenly come to the village at this time. The red-haired girl was sincerely happy about her new name and announced that from now on she would be called Rai. The dragoness recalled that she had fought in the forest with some adventurers when suddenly she smelled an enticing scent and flew straight towards it, while the elder fearfully recognized the warriors as Lord Lun's squad. She reassured the boy, assuring him that she had only played a little with the warriors and had harmed no one, which finally made him sigh with relief. Ryo was surprised to meet such skilled warriors and inquired about the reasons for their appearance, prompting his companion to reluctantly begin the story. Suddenly, Rai fell to her knees before them and pressed her head to the floor, trembling with excitement and begging for forgiveness. She asked with fear whether all these destructions had fallen upon the village because of her, but Ryo immediately began to ask her to lift her head. The girl sadly lowered her eyes and quietly explained that she had thought the forest was endless and did not want to harm anyone at all. The elder sighed and with a heavy heart confirmed her worst fears. In this form, her mighty power inadvertently caused downpours that spread much farther than she could control. When the man confessed that he also does not like conflicts, Rai instantly cheered up and sincerely thanked him. She promised that she would focus, stop the rain in the entire region, and forever protect the settlement from floods. Meanwhile, Rai had already decided everything for him and gently offered the boy to become her personal chef. Ryo was surprised and blinked when she suddenly addressed him directly. The girl came close and joyfully demanded to eat as much curry as possible from now on, while the stunned boy could only ask about that cook. She smiled slyly and assured that asking for help would definitely not be free. She even closed her eyes in pleasure, recalling that delicacy. In all her long years of life, she had never eaten anything better. And the next moment, the girl confidently pointed her finger up and announced that she would sign a dragon contract with Ryo. A contract with a dragon? The butler was so shocked that his jaw dropped. The girl with sharp fangs smiled boldly. Lord Lun's carriage raced forward amid anxious shouts. The day after Raya's departure, everything around fell silent. An anxious Lund rushed into the village and immediately ran to Ryo, asking about the fate of the residents. The men did not understand how the dragon could fly by without destroying anything, but Ryo calmly replied that the monster had already been here. The girls asked in confusion what had happened, as everything around should have burned down after the visit of such a monster. Ryo could only helplessly sigh, not knowing where to even begin the explanation. Lund was simply stunned in shock. Then Ryo slowly rolled up the sleeve of his shirt, revealing to his companions the magical dragon mark on his forearm. The elf could not believe his ears, refusing to accept the fact of friendship with the rain dragon. The conversation was moved to the large estate. Lund finally came to terms with the reality of the contract, and the elf acknowledged the extraordinary strength of the boy. Suddenly, the door burst open with a bang, and a frightened beast girl flew in, screaming that the rain dragon was returning. Her ear twitched anxiously again. The beast girl suddenly froze in place and widened her eyes in shock upon noticing something in the sky. In the middle of the village, a huge white dragon appeared with a mysterious bag in its mouth, causing frightened adventurers to rush forward. A huge winged beast was rapidly diving from the clouds straight at them. The main character hurriedly urged his friends to lower their weapons and assured them that there was a simple explanation for all of this. At that moment, the monster landed on the ground with a deafening roar. The dragon scrutinized the travelers and asked in surprise if they were not the same people he had so joyfully played with last time. At these words, the stern squad leader simply froze and broke out in a cold sweat. Suddenly, a sweet little girl appeared before them, waving her hand cheerfully and apologizing for the previous incident, promising a generous gift. She unveiled a mountain of gold and ancient artifacts before the astonished warriors, offering to take anything they liked. The amazed boy immediately wondered if there was anything here that he could sell profitably, while the girl proudly referred to this pile as her favorite collection. The travelers could hardly believe that this carefree child was the same powerful rain dragon whose strength had once nearly cost them their lives. Suddenly, the young man's gaze caught a familiar silhouette among the pile of jewels. The girl began to happily rummage through the treasures, looking for the coolest thing. She drew an elegant dark sword, and with a smile announced that this very weapon once belonged to a legendary hero. Ryo was shocked as he examined the weapon in his hands, unable to believe that he was holding a real Japanese katana. The priest was taken aback by the guess, while the girl calmly confirmed that it was the real sword of the hero, which she had once received personally. She just remained silent. The boy was feverishly wondering if this could be just a coincidence. At the priest's words about the impossibility of selling such a relic, Ryo asked if they had any other valuable items for exchange for money. Then the girl caught the nun's attention by showing her something shiny in her fist. A large stone was shining on her palm. The nun gasped in surprise upon recognizing the uncut diamond, while the men nearby stood frozen with their mouths agape. She valued the find at hundreds of millions of crowns, and the generous guest readily allowed her to take it for herself. The delighted priest immediately decided to hang the famous sword in the church in a prominent place. The man gratefully thanked for such amazing help, while the girl just cheerfully waved away the thanks. Ryo seriously looked at his companion and suggested talking privately. She gently called him to follow her. They climbed to a high hill, exposing their faces to the pleasant, fresh wind. Ryo quietly turned to Rai, as he also had an important question for her. The girl just sighed, instantly guessing what was on his mind. The boy asked what kind of person that legendary hero who once possessed the sword was. Then he awkwardly looked away, calling Brown Eyes merely a dish from his homeland. After all, Rai looked at him intently and asked if he had invented this mysterious kadi himself. Rai explained that she has been living in the world for a very long time and knows almost everything, but she had never heard of cavities, which made Ryo seriously anxious. Seeing his bewildered face, the girl laughed cheerfully and confessed that it was just a joke, and she had also lied. A playful smile appeared on her face, and a shocking confession slipped from her lips. She knows perfectly well about the cavity. Ryo, you came from another world, didn't you? She quietly but confidently voiced his biggest secret. While the iron head of the armor angrily shouted about a precise strike, the boy simply triumphantly raised his finger up. Rai suddenly stopped and stunned Ryo with a question to the forehead, whether he had arrived from another world. The boy froze in place from surprise. Struggling to force a smile, he tried to backtrack and asked what she was even talking about. The girl smiled carefree and reassured him that she definitely wasn't planning to eat him or anything like that. Thoughts immediately swirled in Ryo's head. If Rai knows about the kadi and possesses such wild power, then that former deputy was indeed a hero. Realizing that there was no point in lying any longer, he quietly exhaled and finally confessed. When Ryo asked about the name of that place, Rai recalled distant Japan on planet Earth, and the boy instantly realized that it was hardly a coincidence. She added that the last great hero also came from this strange place. In this world, he was known as Sky, although the boy's real name was Sora. Rio nearly lost his ability to speak from what he heard. The girl with a smile recalled that the alien had a bunch of strange knowledge, among which was a curry recipe. However, she warmly added that the curry from Rio is still the best, as he put his own effort into it. Hearing the clever question about whether it was his special skill, Rio just awkwardly smiled. You really can't hide anything from this girl. The boy's words instantly confused the girl, and she directly asked why he spoke as if he hadn't prepared the dish himself. She finally realized, creating food just from air is a skill that completely breaks the laws of this world, which is why Rio's dishes turn out so delicious. The boy asked in surprise if she was bringing it up again, and the girl quietly confirmed, yes, about Sky. Crossing her arms, she thoughtfully added that she never expected to encounter abilities of such a high level again. Unlike Rio's peaceful magic, Sky's powers carried a deadly danger. All he had to do was unsheath his sword, and there would be no one left on the battlefield who could defeat him. She sighed heavily, for today this legendary warrior had turned into an ordinary children's fairy tale, although he was once an incredibly interesting person. Rio listened to her silently, pondering the so-called unbeatable force that was usually referred to as simply cheating in his homeworld. The girl recalled how she once ate the dish he brought and exclaimed how delicious the curry was, while Sky only assured her that the real dish tasted much better. At that time, she dreamed of trying it at least once, and the boy confidently promised that he would definitely prepare everything himself if he found a way to return home. They could sit together for hours until late at night, and she would always ask him to tell her again about his homeland. However, now, standing in the middle of the empty cemetery, she painfully realized that there were almost no people left who remembered his stories. It was precisely for this reason that she agreed to the deal. Upon learning that Rio was also an alien, the girl hoped to see something truly interesting from him. And then she quietly changed the subject. Turning her back, the girl confessed that after Sky's disappearance, there was only a complete emptiness left inside her, and Rio could only silently watch her go. Rio quietly asked his companion if the former hero had returned to his native world. A dead silence surrounded, and only a distant, snow-covered mountain loomed on the horizon. The girl sadly replied that Sky never found his way back and died in this world. Noticing how the boy's face instantly fell, she urged him not to be sad. Rio simply lowered his head in silence. She reminded that Sky lived a happy life here among loyal friends and assured that Rio would also be able to find his place. Moreover, the hope for a return still remained, as the former hero simply did not have time to find the right way. The girl warmly added that their appearance in this dimension definitely has an important reason. Both fell silent for a moment, gazing into the distance. Meanwhile, the villagers looked at the bucket filled to the brim with surprise, sincerely thanking the boy for his unique knowledge. Rio watched from afar as true life finally returned to the once neglected village. People around were smiling joyfully. Then he suddenly realized, even if he couldn't fight like a legendary knight, his mission was to share knowledge with others. The companion called it the development of culture, while Rio firmly promised himself to bring happiness to people through the power of his own mind. He looked confidently ahead, determined to finish the task that proved too difficult for the hero himself. She asked if he would ever stop doing this, but immediately set a price, a plate of curry. Smiling slyly, she offered her help. The sun slowly rose over the rebuilt village. A crowd of residents was gathering near the main estate. The foreman loudly called everyone to the table. Rio and Sylvia warmly welcomed the guests. The girls immediately surrounded the boy, demanding more curry and soup. Mr. Justin sincerely thanked Rio for his help. The huge pot quickly emptied. Justin praised the chef for the quick rebuilding of the village, but Rio just smiled awkwardly. Suddenly, the man shared the joyful news. The diamond deal prepared by Mrs. Rai turned out to be successful. The girls clapped their hands happily, and the cook sighed with relief. Sylvia sincerely congratulated Justin on this success. The received funds finally allowed for the completion of the village's reconstruction, thanks to the treasures of paradise. Hearing the praise, the girl laughed proudly, although Rio looked at her boasting with a slight irony. Then Justin turned to her with a new request, and the companion eloquently allowed him to speak. He explained that it is she, as the companion of the legendary hero, who must personally deliver an important item. The man solemnly proposed to hold a grand celebration of restoration, where Rai would present this sword to the community so that it would become a sacred treasure of the village. Rai thoughtfully placed a finger on her chin, agreeing that there was indeed sense in this idea. She solemnly promised to personally hand over the sword, and the man was overflowing with gratitude, already imagining this scene before the entire village. However, the man suddenly became noticeably serious and hesitantly began to talk about another delicate matter. But Rai didn't even notice this, and shining with impatience, jumped closer with a question about the exact date of the celebration. Ultimately, the friends decided to voice the main question, stating that they needed his advice. The man became concerned and asked if they were lacking anything, but Rai immediately assured him that there were no problems with the ceremony itself. They just wanted to organize another event in parallel to genuinely please the local residents. Many people still felt anxious after what they had experienced, so the friends could not decide which event would lift their spirits. Hearing this, the man sincerely thanked them, as it was thanks to this trio that the village had finally returned to normal life. He said that every year at this time they held a loud festival, and now is the best moment to make it grand to dispel the remnants of sadness. Since this is the most important holiday of the year, the man admitted that they are just lost in guesses and are afraid to make a mistake. Rai instantly felt guilty, and with tears in her eyes, began to apologize for the problem she had caused, making her husband panic and wave his hands in denial. The man looked at her with hope, sincerely hoping that she would have some good idea. The girl confidently raised her index finger and mysteriously declared that she had a pretty good idea. She suggested organizing a big curry feast so that everyone could eat their fill and charge up with crazy energy. The ruler with an impassive face assured that he was speaking quite seriously, while the companions urged him and the girl to calm down. Rio slyly suggested that she just wanted to fill her belly with her favorite dish, which greatly angered her. However, the boy quickly calmed his emotions, thinking that this was much better than constant worries and complaints. The Lord admitted that as a ruler, it is difficult for him to see fear on people's faces, but he does not know how to come up with cheerful events. While the man felt awkward due to his own helplessness, Rio became seriously interested in the very idea of the festival. Usually, the local festivities were limited to playing instruments, dancing, and distributing traditional roasted meat. Rio began to ask the ruler in detail about the peculiarities of local festive traditions. After listening to the explanation, the Lord decided to ask how similar ceremonies were held in the boy's homeland. He thoughtfully rubbed his chin. Before his eyes, memories of the noisy night streets of his native world appeared, adorned with lanterns and filled with food stalls. For a moment, the guy froze from a surge of nostalgia. In his childhood, he loved to just wander through those rows and taste various street treats. The boy smiled softly and said that he had an interesting proposal. When he suggested organizing a festival based on the traditions of his homeland, his friends just stared at him in bewildered silence. The young man raised his index finger and proudly called this holiday the Anichi Festival. Rio, Lord Justin, and the girls exchanged bewildered glances in complete silence. Lord Justin suddenly broke the silence and spoke about the mysterious Anic Festival. Rio awkwardly smiled and asked what kind of holiday it was. The boy began to tell about his distant homeland, where dozens of stalls with hot noodles and cotton candy lined the streets. There, children spent hours catching goldfish with thin nets in large pools. On warm summer evenings, everyone gathered by the tall stage with lanterns and danced together. The girls listened to this with surprise, while Rio fondly remembered the neighbor who made very delicious takoyaki. Justin thoughtfully rubbed his chin, assessing the significant costs of effort and materials for organizing such an event. Suddenly, the Lord confidently clenched his fist and declared that such a celebration would bring a lot of joy, so it must be tried. He smiled slyly, thinking of something of his own. The man explained that such festivities would be a salvation for the village of Meimei. Ryo was surprised to stand up to his patron. Justin warmly added that he noticed a special joy in the young man's eyes during the story and simply wanted to see that sincere smile again. They headed together to the large office of the estate to discuss the first steps and details of the plan. The young man gathered everyone at the table and suggested starting the working meeting with a story about the Enichi holiday. Everyone agreed. He laid out pictures of delicious street food before them and explained that the festival would provide jobs for the villagers and help rebuild the settlement. Everyone liked the idea, but Sarah noted that the biggest problem would be preparing the booths and prizes for the game. Suddenly, Rai interrupted the conversation and cheerfully offered her help. The boy added confusedly that he would make the food and tents himself, but it would really be difficult with the prizes. In response, the girl firmly slammed her fist on the table and assured that she would easily get a bunch of gifts for the little ones. But when the men imagined piles of gold, crowns, and magical weapons instead of toys, their jaws dropped in horror. Gathering his courage, the young man tried to turn everything into a joke and agreed to entrust the matter to her, although his heart still tightened with anxiety. The blonde aristocrat reassured the team, reminding them that there would be enough money for everything, thanks to the diamonds that Rai once gave them. She smiled warmly. For her, it was a chance to sincerely apologize to the villagers for past troubles. Then Sarah took on the task, promising to compile the entire budget and outline the plan down to the smallest details. She smiled shyly and admitted that she herself was also eagerly looking forward to the festival. The young man looked at his friends and wondered how his random idea was so easily and harmoniously becoming a reality. The cat girl suddenly ran up to her friends and curiously asked what they were discussing together. Ryo and Sarah turned around in surprise at her loud exclamation. The boy said that they were planning to hold a festival from his homeland here, and the Beastman immediately became excited about the idea. Ryo asked the warrior for help, but he just awkwardly hesitated. The friends explained that they urgently needed to return to Solon and report to the guild about the situation with the rain dragon. They exchanged confused glances. Then Ryo suggested with a smile to simply send a letter. The elf denied that they still did not have access to the postal service, but the young man asked him to wait a minute. Before them stood a strange, shining chest, resembling a magical storage of items. Ryo approached the mysterious structure closer. The cook with a letter in his hands explained that thanks to his skill, he had placed a copy of this stall right in their shop in Solon, which allowed for instant transfer of items. Hearing about the spatial magic capable of covering such distances, the warrior realized with relief that they could now send the report without the long journey back. Ryo simply smiled contentedly, once again convinced of the uniqueness of his strange acquaintance. And the warrior merely swallowed dry saliva in shock, as such a crazy skill was not mentioned even in the oldest legends. The red-haired girl impatiently exclaimed that everything was ready and she was terribly hungry, while Ryo just smiled in a conciliatory manner. Behind, there was a quick thud of feet, and someone loudly called the boy. Ryo raised the culinary spatula and joyfully announced that it was time to start the tasting of the festive dishes. The guests froze in confusion, and a loud growl came from the stomach of the stern warrior. The boy smiled joyfully in response. The first drops of oil sizzled on the hot stove. The white-haired friend curiously examined the strange slab, while Ryo suggested that she simply observe the process. In front of Ryo, a system panel appeared showing his level 50 and the activated skill of the fair booth. In addition to creating products and cuisine, new forms of the stall have appeared in its menu, from a shooting range to preparing takoyaki. The meetings regarding the festival planning have finally concluded. Suddenly, the room was flooded with bright light, and a loud system bell rang in Ryo's ears. Ryo was surprised to note his new level, while his white-haired friend jumped with interest, asking about the new possibilities. The screen displayed purely festival entertainment, a takoyaki stall, a shooting gallery, and even a fish-catching game. The timely emergence of new skills seemed somewhat eerie to Rio. He involuntarily wondered whether the system was adapting to his own decision to organize a traditional celebration. A moment before Rio, a real stall for making takoyaki materialized, one he had never dared to dream of. However, something still made him uneasy. Rio picked up a traditional wooden boat-shaped plate, which was an exact replica of those he remembered from Earth Festival. Next to the round ball mold was a brand new shiny plate that opened up many more culinary possibilities. At first, the boy poured a special dough created by magic into round molds, and instead of scarce seafood, he placed pieces of cheese inside. Then he skillfully began to flip each ball, waiting for the golden crust. Although broth was usually added to the dish, the guy simply poured thick dark sauce and mayonnaise over it. Aromatic cheese balls on the grill, exactly like the famous takoyaki, were finally ready. The culinary companion stared in astonishment at the previously unseen marvel. The red-haired girl carefully blew on the steam rising from the treat. The boy warned his friend about the danger of burning herself, but she had already sent the ball to her mouth with a smile. The guest's eyes instantly lit up when she felt the tender and hot cheese filling. The light-haired companion and her stern commander also broke into smiles, impressed by the combination of spicy sauce and strange white mayonnaise. The boy smiled contentedly and picked up the spatulas for the new dish. The comrade was surprised, as the new dough looked the same, but the chef assured that the taste would be completely different. The boy poured the mixture onto the pan in an even disc and placed thinly sliced pieces of pork on top. The secret of this base was fresh cabbage, which he finely chopped with a large knife. With a swift motion of 2 spatulas, the young man flipped the large pancake to the other side. The hot okonomiyaki was finally ready, glistening with lush patterns of sauce and mayonnaise on a large plate. The girls immediately tasted the dish and showered the guy with compliments, assuring him that this version was even more filling than cheese toasts. Looking at their satisfied faces, Rio smiled with relief. Although some original ingredients were missing, the culinary experiment turned out surprisingly well. Suddenly, the companion turned to him and asked what prizes he wanted to prepare for the entertainment. At that moment, a little friend carefully approached the boy from behind. She reminded me of the traditional stalls for catching toys and wished for floating fish or balls. Rio pondered, while the girl playfully suggested her own idea. In her palm lay a strange gumo fruit that, according to her, amusingly bounced as soon as it hit the ground. She spoke so sincerely about how fun it was to play with those balls alone that the boy mentally called her a true child. The blonde was in a frenzy over the bouncy rubber ball. Suddenly, a friend popped up beside me, joyfully exclaiming the word "bita bita." She explained that this strange creature would be perfect, leaving Rio only to bewilderedly ask about the incomprehensible word. It turned out that the girl meant the decorative betta fish. It was elegant, bright, and very easy to care for. The cat girl focused, trying to remember the boundaries of these creatures' habitat in this area. She joyfully raised her finger up and announced that there are plenty of them in the grassland forest, where the fruits of gomu they need also grow. The eyes of the experienced warrior in the bandana widened in fear, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. "Herbaceous forest?" he asked quietly, freezing in place at what he had heard. The boy just looked at him in confusion and naively asked where this forest was located at all. A dead silence fell, and the whole crew stared at him with silent horror on their faces. Hearing the name of the herb forest, the experienced mercenary was genuinely surprised. The young man anxiously asked if they were really going to go there. The warrior simply nodded in response. The leader explained that without this, they would not see the rewards, although the boy was still asking about the level of danger. Before them lay the impenetrable wild lands at the very border, from where almost no one returned alive. The sharp-eared satellite explained that the way there lies through giant mountains 6,000 meters high. The main character froze in fear. The elf warned about powerful monsters in the mountains, calling a hike there a certain death. Suddenly, the little companion interrupted the conversation and calmly reminded that she could fly. The whole team fell silent in surprise. The girl irritably reminded that she was actually a dragon, forcing the leader to justify himself. She assured the young man that this forest is very peaceful and would be perfect for relaxation. Hearing this, the blonde Sarah dreamily clasped her hands and confessed that she really wanted to go there and finally take a break from her daily routine. The young man smiled warmly and invited the girl to go with them. Ray cheerfully assured that it was not difficult for her to take a few more people with her, but Sarah still worried whether it was a good idea. She blushed awkwardly, thinking that this place would be perfect for a romantic date. The dragoness happily added that this is her absolute favorite spot. "Then everything is decided," said Rai, closing the topic and making her friend blush and exclaim in embarrassment. She just squinted with pleasure and repeated that there was really nothing to worry about here. The companions only glanced at each other anxiously, doubting whether it was safe to let them go alone. But Rai proudly declared that she is the great rain dragon, and it is enough for her to just glare angrily at the enemy for them to flee. Suddenly, their plans were abruptly cut off by the stern and unyielding no from Sarah's older sister. The trio instantly froze in place with funny, silent questions on their faces. The younger sister looked at her in confusion, while the older one mentally scolded herself for why no one trusted her. Indeed, those lands have long been considered a cursed and forbidden territory, where it is better not to venture even with a dragon. Although the steward tried to reassure everyone with the safety of the forest, the older sister stood her ground. Sarah was not an adventurer. She dramatically pulled the girl close to her, shouting that she would never let her defenseless little one into such a dangerous place. The attempt to translate everything into a joke only made Sarah sigh wearily. Ray suddenly smiled widely and suggested that Luna join them. She confidently assured them of complete safety. The moon still hesitated, worrying about Sarah's safety. The father gently asked his daughter to trust the guest. He insisted that Luna go with them. They finally reunited after the separation, but due to a lot of things to do, they didn't even have time to be together properly. The question was closed. Sarah happily hugged her sister, who awkwardly muttered that she agreed only for the sake of looking after her. The young man scheduled the departure for tomorrow morning, and the team went to pack their things. The door has closed, the things are packed. The next morning has come. The travelers warmly said goodbye to the host at the gate. Heaven cheerfully ordered everyone to take a step back. A sudden, blinding flash of magic made the friends cover their eyes with their hands. The majestic white dragon spread its wings in the middle of the village, preparing for the journey ahead. He urged the company to climb onto his back faster, although the girl next to him couldn't take her eyes off his majestic appearance. The dragon immediately warned that it would take off very quickly, so it ordered everyone to hold on tightly. The dark-haired boy shouted to Raya that they were completely ready. The powerful thrust of the wings instantly lifted them off the ground, forcing the passengers to close their eyes from the intense pressure. The giant shot up into the clouds with a loud scream from his frightened friends. As soon as the flight leveled out, the stunned boy barely rasped that the headwind nearly tore his face off. Heaven turned and gently allowed everyone to finally lift their heads. The boy timidly stood up and was struck dumb with amazement. Before them opened up endless mountain ridges, beyond which the protected forest was already visible. The boy cheerfully reported a precise hit, while the empty armor nearby lamented its severed head. The morning in the city began quietly, marking the start of a new side story. Kane, the assistant manager of the Salty Burger, woke up to loud shouts of his name. A worried girl burst into the room and stunned everyone with the news that a crowd of 50 people would visit them in the morning. She pointed at him with her finger and ordered him to follow her immediately. The young man could only utter a shocked, "What?" It turned out that in Ryo's absence, Hana was temporarily in charge of all affairs at the main store. She showed him a culinary tent, copied using a special skill. In the note left behind, the chef informed that he has already prepared the ingredients for the whole week. This charming stand shared common content with Ryo's workbench and toolbox. Hana waved to him and ran to open the establishment, leaving the rest of the troubles to Kine. Having finished the exhausting preparation of the dishes, the tired boy helplessly slid down to the floor. But he quickly composed himself and resolutely clenched his fist, promising to do everything possible. The burger joint Solon Burger has finally opened its doors to a long line of visitors. Kane glanced into the kitchen to check on his people. The assistant cheerfully greeted the guy, and he responded by wishing everyone a good shift. Suddenly, a mad laugh echoed from the corner, and Kane instantly turned pale, covered in cold sweat. There, Kutor fervently chopped food in the frying pan and shouted for everything to burn in hellfire. Next to the table stood a suspicious black jar. The boy just smiled, realizing that the girl could now be fully trusted in the kitchen. But in a moment he grabbed a strange little bottle and sternly asked the girl what this liquid was. Kutor froze in fear when the boy nervously asked if she had added it to the food. Trembling with fear, the girl began to justify herself, saying that it was just a test sample of her black magic spice. Meanwhile, the guests in the hall were already squealing with joy. The charming waiter with a perfect smile served the clients a hot signature burger. Kane rejoiced at the establishment's success, not even suspecting how much effort that forced smile cost the poor waiter. But someone was already ominously watching them through the glass doors. Two suspicious types were sinisterly chuckling, anticipating a quick and easy job. They stopped by the brick wall of the famous establishment. Having confirmed that it was indeed the salty burger joint, the accomplices exchanged satisfied glances. One of them shook a bag with a deposit in his hand, dreaming of a generous reward for an ordinary raid. They only mocked others' success, believing that too many well-known upstarts always need to be put in their place. Noticing the absence of the burger joint's owner, the criminals decided that nothing would stop them. Upon entering, they immediately attacked the young employee of the establishment. The attackers brazenly loomed over the boy, loudly accusing him of poisoning and using suspicious ingredients. They began to shout about the questionable quality of the minced meat in the boy's hands, causing the young waitress behind to panic in helplessness. Suddenly, a strong hand rested on the rebel's shoulder, and a calm cook with a beard politely asked him not to make a fuss. Maintaining absolute composure, the man inquired about the exact time of the purchase, immediately throwing the screamer off balance. The attackers were instantly covered in cold sweat, not expecting to encounter such a dangerous defender here. The step of a heavy boot echoed through the hall, accompanied by a menacing question about the reason for the noise. Both accomplices trembled, completely losing their confidence and sensing imminent danger. The bullies sweated and blinked in confusion, recognizing who had just appeared before them. Suddenly, in the middle of the crowd, the young Lord Cerrito appeared and asked in surprise what was actually happening here. Seeing the aristocrat, the frightened hooligans immediately fled, shouting threats and farewell, while the boy himself bewilderedly tried to understand what had happened. The red-haired girl sincerely thanked Lord Cerrito for the rescue, and he proudly stated that he was just working undercover, which raised even more questions for her. Then the girl turned to Alan and sincerely thanked him for his help, calling him a real champ. Alan simply smiled gently and admitted that he didn't know how to fight at all, but he just couldn't allow anyone to tarnish their food while the cook behind him was confidently proving that her dishes were impeccable. Lord Cerrito simply tiredly closed his eyes, not understanding what chaos had just occurred around him. The boy next to her immediately cut off her joy, sternly forbidding the tearful girl from approaching the spices. Seizing the moment, the young lord cheerfully asked if he would now be given fries at least occasionally, but the man behind sternly refused. A loud, desperate scream echoed down the entire street. Cerrito jumped in surprise when the furious Modon appeared before him and ordered him to return to the palace immediately. Late in the evening, tired Alan sighed that everyone had helped him today, even though the day had been exhausting. Left alone, the boy hesitated whether he could replace his mentors by himself. Looking at his work cart, he clenched his fist resolutely. His friends were also working hard right now, so he couldn't fall behind either. Kane unfolded the note and froze in surprise upon seeing the message from Rio. He wrote in a very mundane way that he had befriended the Rain Dragon, made a pact with him, and was now heading to prepare a festival in the grassland forest on an isolated island, asking Kane to keep an eye on the shop. The night's silence enveloped the house, and in the boy's mind only one question spun. What does Mr. Rio actually do?